A Mission for Mira, 26,946 words. Chapter 1. The guild hall was strangely quiet that morning. Levy sat at the bar, her notes strewn about as she worked to decipher her newest book. Without Natsu and his team around to make a fuss, the work went remarkably quick. In the far corner, the Thunder Legion relaxed, looking over a stack of request pamphlets that had yet to be posted. Nothing seemed to catch their eyes. "Remember to put those back in a pile so I can hang them up," Mira called from across the room. "Of course," Fried replied for the group. Mira forced a smile as a page fluttered to the floor when Bixlow nudged it with his elbow too far. Closing her eyes and sighing, she put the freshly cleaned glass back in the cabinet. The door flung open with a crash. Every eye turned to look at the out-of-breath messenger boy. He looked around at them. "I have an urgent request for the guildmaster," he called. "I can take it." Mira stepped out from behind the bar and smiled at the young man. He looked up at her in amazement. "You're Mira Jane," he breathed. You're just as beautiful as in the magazines." Mira blushed. "Thank you. I can take that for the master. He's up in—" "I'm here," Makarov called from the second floor. He made his way down the stairway with more grace than the messenger thought was possible for a man his age. "What's this now?" he asked, taking the page from the boy. The teen straightened up. "My supervisor would like an immediate response, actually. We are—" "Let me read the request, boy." After a moment, the old man snorted to himself and handed it to Mira Jane. "It appears the request is for you." "Me?" The conversation had attracted the rest of the room's attention by now, so the collective surprise was expected. "What type of mission is it?" Levy asked from her seat. She pulled her glasses off and set them beside her book. "It's from a modeling agency, for the magazine's seasons," Mira Jane recited. She scanned the rest of the request. "I've never heard of that one," Levy stated. "We're only a few years old," mumbled the messenger. "But, so why send a guild request if all you need is a model?" Fried pondered. "There's more," Mira explained. "The note says that over the last few months the magazine has had several of their wizard models fall ill with mild cases of magic deficiency disease." "Seriously?" Levy asked. "Sounds serious," Bixlow frowned. "We've hired other wizards, but none of them were able to pinpoint the issue. And none of them were affected to even get any clues," the messenger explained. "My supervisor figured that if we could get a model to come in, the culprit might let their guard down and—" "So you wanted bait?" Loxus asked. The teen's ears flushed red. Not entirely," he stuttered. "We'd be happy to accept any other female mages onto the set to work with Miss Strauss. It doesn't have to be just her alone." Makarov sighed. "Magic deficiency disease isn't something to take lightly. Are you sure, Mira?" "The request does ask for me," the girl stated. "I can handle it, master." "Oh, thank you," the messenger shouted. "The director would like to speak with you at once. The new issue starts shooting tomorrow, so he's—" "Hold on," Makarov interrupted. "I refuse to let you go alone. I know this isn't an S-class mission, but it sounds like other guilds have already failed, and I don't need you getting hurt." "All right," Mira nodded. She looked around the room. "Levy?" "Oh, no," the girl said, throwing her hands up. "I'm not a model. That's not my thing at all. Sorry, Mira." Mira almost laughed with how red the girl blushed. Luckily, she didn't need to beg. "I'll go with you," Evergreen called. She stood up. "In fact, the whole Thunder Legion will be happy to assist." "Now wait," the messenger panicked. "The director said nothing about allowing male models. I can't—" "No, I think this is a good idea," Makarov nodded. "Loxus, Bixlow, and Fried, you three will accompany the girls as their bodyguards and manager." He gave a look to the young messenger who towered over him. "I know very well that proper models have personal bodyguards on set with them, so this should not be an issue to accommodate." The boy sighed and nodded. "If you five would just meet me at the train station in an hour, we can head out then." He sounded panicked, and Mira Jane did not blame him. The train station was quiet when they arrived. Only a few other passengers waited on the platform as the teen handed out their train tickets. They boarded the train, and the Thunder Legion and Mira were promptly left alone in their own car. "This is the way to travel," Bixlow laughed as he took up an entire seat. Loxus was silent, but he too nodded once the train began to move. Obviously, this company knows how to treat its VIPs, Evergreen smiled. Mira Jane is still a very popular model. I'm sure they'd be happy to spare no expense to getting her to accept this mission, Freed stated. Oh, I'm not, Mira tried to say. Don't be modest, Evergreen interrupted. Your last photo shoot was lovely. Yeah, just focus on distracting everyone with Ever. It should be easy, Bixlow added. And with our cover, we should be able to watch from the sides to see if anything is suspicious. If I'm correct, Bixlow and Loxus won't be the only security there. This magazine has 2 other high-profile models that frequent their pages. You two should see what their security knows. I have a list of all the models. We were only given the mission an hour ago, Freed. Evergreen pouted. How did you find out so much? It's probably from the stack of magazines he keeps under his bed, Bixlow teased. I didn't think you'd be interested in the ones with... I'm not a child, Bixlow, Freed blushed. I keep them on my bookshelf, not under my bed. How shameful. Mira covered her smile when she noticed Freed's worried glance at Loxus. The blond man did not seem interested in the intended undertones of the conversation. He simply stared out the train's window in silence. For all the space they had in the train car, Freed and Loxus sat in the same seat pair, facing each other. Mira and Evergreen sat across the aisle from them, while Bixlow sprawled out in his own seat, facing Freed over Loxus's shoulder. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have them. I just figured you'd only keep certain issues on hand, Bixlow added. Well, having them all worked out in my favor. The most recent issue of Sorcerer Weekly had the top unsigned models of the 5 major agencies, and the one from just before the Grand Magic Games had a behind-the-scenes article about the work of the crew in a magazine shoot. I skipped that article when the issue came out, but it was enlightening under our current circumstances. I think I can properly fulfill my role as your manager now. I even picked up the most recent season's issue from the newsstand for you both. That's wonderful, Mira smiled. But really, it isn't that much to be worried about. You all will be fine. Let's just focus on figuring out why the girls are falling ill before someone else gets hurt. The modeling is just a cover. Says the experienced centerfold, Evergreen teased. You're taking all the fun out of the mission, Mira. Do you think they'll give us copies of our issue? She flipped through the magazine Freed handed her, her eyes wide as she imagined herself on these same pages. I've gotten copies when I've done other shoots at least, Mira nodded. If not, I wouldn't be surprised if everyone in the guild buys a copy, Freed stated. I mean, everyone has your previous issues. Even Loxus nodded in response. Mira folded her hands in her lap and smiled to herself. Everyone in the guild was so supportive, but it made her heart beat faster at the thought that Loxus had a copy of her issue somewhere at home. Before she found herself blushing brighter than Levy when she was around a certain dragon slayer, she changed the subject. Are you feeling okay, Loxus? Mira asked. You've been quieter than usual. The man wrinkled his nose, most likely unhappy that someone even noticed. You mentioned at the games that, like Natsu, you do get motion sickness, Freed suggested. It's not that bad, Loxus growled. I'll be fine when we stop. That's right. If Natsu was here, he'd be passed out on the ground, Bixlow stated. The group laughed, the sound filling the empty train car. So Mira, let's talk about these shoots. Mira happily explained the process behind the photo shoots she had been a part of for Sorcerer Weekly and a handful of other magazines over the years. Both Evergreen and Freed nodded along with her explanation. Loxus paid minimal attention, but every now and again Mira noticed him watching her as she happily recounted some of her more fun experiences. She had never been on a small mission with the other S-Class wizard. She only saw how he acted while relaxing at the guild hall or during their large guild-wide emergencies. Truthfully, she was happy to be given a simple mission. She highly doubted she would need to transform and fight on a modeling job. Most magazine publications just wanted a pretty face and a great body in front of the camera. It made the work easy enough for her. Mary Jane was certain that Evergreen would do fine as well. They arrived at the town several hours later and followed the messenger to a tall building by the port. The receptionist, initially surprised at the group's entrance, quickly gathered herself and smiled brightly. Is the director still in, Ash? Asked the teen as he marched towards the stairway in the back. Yes, he should be in his office, the woman nodded. No need, he's expecting me. The FairyTail group followed the young man past the receptionist and to a door. One knock, and the invitation of entry was all the warning the group got before the boy hurried in and nearly closed the door on them. Loxus caught it before it hit Evergreen in the nose. "Excellent, you're back," stated who the group could only assume was the director. "Did you get Mira Jane to agree?" "About that, there's—" Loxus pushed the door open, and the group filed in. The director recognized Mira and gave Evergreen an approving look. He narrowed his eyes at the three boys. "Lee, what is this?" he questioned. Before he could open his mouth to speak, or Loxus could grumble a hasty reply, Freed squared his shoulders and walked to the director's desk. He extended his hand for a firm handshake. "You must be Mr. Matoshi," he began. "I'm Mira Jane and Evergreen's manager. We're delighted that you contacted us. I hope you don't mind the extra muscle." Freed glanced back at Loxus in particular, but held back his usual looks of admiration. "I'd prefer the girls felt safe while working this request. Magic deficiency disease is a serious issue for any wizard, and we'd like to do everything within our power to put a stop to it for you." The director visibly relaxed under Freed's explanation. Even Lee, the messenger, seemed relieved. The FairyTail team remained guarded, but so far, Freed's surprise explanation appeared to be working in their favor. They hoped the director did not question why a wizard would choose to also be a models manager, instead of Mira Jane choosing an actual modeling agency to work with. "It's no problem," the director nodded. "Please sit, all of you. I'm sure you'd like to know what's expected." Lee procured them all chairs. Loxus declined, preferring to lean against the wall near the doorframe. Normally, his distant behavior made their clients wary, but it fit the bodyguard persona he was meant to play. No one encouraged him to sit. "Your request stated that you were looking for Mira Jane to not only find and stop this strange case occurring after your shoots, but also that you wanted her to model for the issue, correct?" Freed asked. He had woven himself a hasty spell of quick thinking and confidence, almost like a glamour, so while his smile cracked and his heart skipped beats, he looked and sounded like he was in total control. It was a useful trick, but it wouldn't last long. This needed to be a short meeting. He gave Mira Jane a quick glance, hoping she would stop him if she needed to add anything. "Yes," the director stated. "I'm willing to pay the reward as well as Mira Jane's modeling fee. This is our most important issue of the year, and I fear if another model comes down ill, we'll go under. We're in heavy competition with Sorcerers Weekly, as I'm sure you know, so being able to put out a successful summer issue after the games is paramount. That's why I've convinced my talent directors to let me hire you, Mira Jane." "So what is it you need us to do exactly?" asked Evergreen. "The shoots are mostly done in-house. The building has several stages and photo setups, so this has to be someone on the inside. I need you to find the culprit and handle it to keep the models safe. It's not cost-effective to keep finding new wizard models to replace the ones who get sick, not to mention paying them compensation since they got sick on the job. To be honest, if you stop the person who's doing this, the money I'll save is greater than any fee you could name in the long run." Mira nodded. The director was being almost too honest with them, but there was nothing to say about that now. "Before I agree, I'd like to know what the summer issue is about," she said. "As you know, I've been gone for 7 years, and I don't know much about what your magazine stands for. My manager did not have time to fill in the blanks on the way over." "Of course," the director smiled. "Here's last summer's issue. We did a beach resort theme for the main spread. It went over remarkably well. But this year we wanted our major brands to go more classic elegance. It's different than anything we or any other magazine has done recently, and our studies show it's a good hook. Here are some of our ideas." Mira touched the artistic renderings of fancy dresses and sleek suits, along with the outdoor lounge and patio cocktail dresses. They encompassed several time periods. Most of them were from a very specific designer. "As you can see, we're working with Blockade closely. They're debuting their line for their new season, and we're doing an article for them about it. Their rep is going to pick models specifically, but I'm sure they'll want you involved," the director explained. Mira nodded without showing too much excitement over the prospect. She knew the director was just talking through his teeth at this point, if the Blockade rep was really in charge. It would be amazing, to be honest, since Magnolia had a small storefront where Elfman liked to shop. She wondered if she could convince the rep to send her a formal suit in his size, as her brother no longer fit in his old one. "Now, do we find this all to your standards so you can sign the contracts?" The director interrupted her thoughts. Freed jumped back in. "Everything looks in order, yes." He nodded. He took the papers and read through them as quick as humanly possible. They seemed to be typical non-disclosures and liability contracts. Nothing overly hazardous or binding in the future. Freed handed a set to Mira and Evergreen. "And you have no issues with the girls' security and I overseeing these shoots?" Freed said it in a tone that bordered on threatening. The director nodded. "Not at all. There are a few other models that have their teams in tow as well. Normally I'd be hesitant since we're completely in-house, but I know this is a special case. I'll get extra badges for you all by tomorrow morning." "Excellent," Freed nodded. Mira and Evergreen signed the paperwork and handed it back. "Also, we're housing our models upstairs if they wish," the director explained. "It's recommended so we can assist if anything goes wrong. Otherwise, there's an inn down the road. Lee, do we have any suites upstairs?" "A few," came the messenger's response. "Great. I take it that works for you?" "Yes, that would be perfect," Freed responded. "Great. Lee will take you upstairs and get you settled in. I'll have your badges delivered as soon as possible. Your call time is 7 a.m. tomorrow morning in the lobby. Come ready to take basic shots and work with our designers and artists. We're doing measurements and color tests to set up the shoots over the week," the director explained. The group nodded, with Evergreen looking slightly more nervous than excited, and they followed Lee out of the room and up the steps. He presented them with what looked like it had once been a luxury 2-bedroom condo. "Whoa, this place is fancy!" Bixlow exclaimed. The FairyTail group stepped inside, noting the cream carpets and fully furnished interior. The windows looked out over the mountains in the distance. "The magazine board bought the building for a steal. It was full of apartments for the wealthy, but the demand just wasn't there," explained Lee absent-mindedly. "Here's my card if you need anything. You have a communication lacrima on the table over there. If I don't answer, it can also reach the reception desk. The instructions are on the card. Have a good evening." Lee shut the door behind him and left the group alone. Evergreen started to speak. "Well, that was crazy," Bixlow finished for her. "Great job with the director, Freed." "Yeah," Loxus nodded. Freed beamed with praise, but he let his exhaustion show now that he dropped the enchantment. "It was nothing," he lied. Mira smiled. "Even so, they have no reason not to let you three accompany us and poke around the photo shoots. Hopefully we can finish the mission before anyone gets hurt." They all nodded. "Are the gigs all so early in the morning?" Evergreen asked. "This model needs her sleep." 7 a.m. is late for most shoots," Mira explained. "Staying on site helps. I'm sure times will be earlier for the actual shoot days, though." Evergreen groaned. "Well, we might as well turn in early then," Freed suggested. The group agreed. Mira and Evergreen retired to the privacy of the back bedroom, leaving the boys to decide on their own sleeping arrangements. The apartment had 2 king-sized beds, compared to the oversized twin beds or mat rooms with bedrolls in most inns that they were used to. This was an unbelievable luxury. Even so, Evergreen doubted all 3 boys would share the single bed, so it came as no surprise the next morning when her and Mira found Loxus snoring away on one of the couches in the main room. Chapter 2. The 7 a.m. call was easier to make for the FairyTail group than it appeared for some of the others. Mira and Evergreen stood bright-eyed and ready, while Freed and the other 2 boys hung back. Their passes had been delivered to the slot in the door sometime in the night, but even so, they were on guard. The lobby finally filled as the clock chimed the hour. Just like his research proved, Freed saw 2 other bodyguards and another manager accompany their models. Out of the 20 or so young women, only 2 appeared not to be staying on the premises. The team made a note of each to find out why. It was a good start, but they doubted that either of the girls would be behind the case. It would be too obvious. "Welcome!" the director called out the moment he entered the lobby. The room fell into hushed whispers. "It looks like we're missing a few people, but since we have a schedule to keep, let's head back. I'll show you the studio. There's been some updates for all of you who've worked with us before." The director waved them through a set of inconspicuous double doors framed by potted plants and down an industrial hallway. Evergreen gave Mira a confused look, but her guildmate could only shrug. She was used to location shoots. The idea of a large indoor studio was not foreign, but she would withhold her judgment until she saw it. As it stood, nothing about the setup or the people around her gave her any indication of danger. She glanced back at the boys, noting their heavy observation. Mira sighed. The walk only took a minute or 2. The hallway opened into a wide room with soaring ceilings and ample lighting. Natural sunlight flooded into the room from raised windows and hidden skylights. The The setup was enough that even Mira paused to take it all in. She felt a large presence stop just short behind her. Without turning, she knew it was Loxus. The director beamed. "Quite impressive, right, Miss Strauss?" Mira nodded, still marveling at the room and its mini studios. Somehow, the design team managed to allow each of the sets the proper amount of natural light. The room itself was clean and filled with racks of clothing, props, and camera equipment. "Come along, girls. The assistants would like to start their measurements and get the color palettes going. The lounge is straight back," the director called out. He took Mira around the waist and stepped forward. The other FairyTail members followed. "I hope you'll find that while our setup is different from other magazines, it's very effective for getting the desired look we're looking for. Last year, we built an entire bathhouse set for our winter issue. The girls especially liked that one when they weren't using it for the shoot," the director mentioned happily. Mira let him chatter in her ear while they made their way to what he referred to as the lounge. It was a cute setup with a fluffy carpet and half walls to separate the space from the hustle of the shooting studios. It reminded Mira Jane of the one time she was almost a part of the Dark Angels fashion show. It appeared the show had since gone out of business, but that did not surprise her. That company was more interested in pleasing their sponsors than putting on a good show. She was fortunate that the perfect mission came up and gave her an excuse to bow out gracefully. Mira Jane untangled herself from the director's arm and made her way to the open seat beside Evergreen on one of the 3 oversized couches. The other girls filled in the remaining spaces. It was immediately clear who knew each other from previous gigs. Normally, social politics did not bother Mira, but she knew for the mission it would be beneficial to know which girls liked each other. "All right, I'll start by introducing our staff that will be working with all of you for hair and makeup. Our head makeup artist is Misha. She'll oversee the others. If you have any issues at all, please speak with her right away," the director stated. Misha smiled and gave them a quick wave. "My team and I are excited to work with all of you," she spoke. The 3 artists nodded, and the girls fell into hushed whispers. The excitement even got to Evergreen. She practically hummed in her seat as the photographers and the set director were introduced. Finally, the director turned to the last few people. "And finally, I'm here! Don't start without me!" The shout rang out, and the doors across the studio were flung open. All eyes turned to a raven-haired woman who strode through the entrance and over to the group. "I told you 7 a.m., Nessa," the director chastised. "Take a seat." "A model needs her beauty rest," the girl pouted. With the grace of a newborn deer, she stumbled into the lounge and sat on the fluffy white carpet in the very center. The girls on Mira Jane's other side whispered, but she did not catch the remarks. Feeling the boys' eyes on her, she noted they found the new girl's actions suspicious enough to warrant figuring out who she was. With the way this was going, their group would have a lot of leads to follow up on later. "As I was saying, these are the designers for the issue. They'll be doing measurements and seeing which of you will be best for each of their designs, in addition to our in-house fashions. Everyone is guaranteed at least one major label during the shoots." A few of the younger girls made noises of uncontrolled excitement. Mira Jane smiled. She remembered her first shoot. The designer of her favorite sportswear bra had been there, and Mira desperately wanted to be chosen to be the one to wear the newest outfit. It was not the correct fit at the time, but the excitement and anticipation was the same even now. "We'll send you out in groups," the director announced. "So if it isn't your turn, you can just wait here. There's food over there if you get hungry, and the restrooms are behind that corner in our remodeled changing rooms." The first group was called, leaving Mira Jane and Evergreen alone on the couch when the other 3 girls left. "So, how are you feeling?" Mira Jane asked Evergreen. "Somewhat nervous, to be honest," the other girl stated. "I'm so focused on this modeling thing that I keep forgetting about the mission. Do you really think one of these girls is the one doing it?" The 2 of them looked around at their fellow models. There were several younger girls bunched on the opposite couch. They all spoke in rapid, high tones, more excited at the prospect of their first modeling gigs than anything else. The other girls seemed to be a mix of seasoned models and just starting out, so it was anyone's call if they were behind this. "It's hard to tell right now," Mira Jane smiled. "Hopefully the boys will have better luck scoping out things if we get busy." Both girls turned to find the boys out of the way of the excitement. Bixlow perused the snacks set out. Mira Jane knew no one would touch them for the first few days, so it was good someone was interested. Freed spoke with the other man dressed in a crisp suit. The relaxed look on his face spoke volumes. Finding Loxus was a bit of a challenge. He had made himself at home near some extra lighting equipment and stood in silence watching the activity. He glanced over, as if feeling Mira's eyes on him, and they locked gazes for a moment. The blonde raised his eyebrow, and all Mira could do was give him a quick smile and turn back to Evergreen. Without trying, he had very much fallen into the bodyguard act for the mission. "Mira, we're up!" Evergreen stated. The director waved them and 3 other girls over to where a row of vanities waited. The makeup artist and hairstylist took each of them in a chair and the questions began. Skin allergies and scents were written down before their skin tones were recorded and color palettes produced. The girls were each asked about their skin and hair routines, and the conversation flowed from there as they were made up for their test shots. The head of makeup made sure to have a word with each girl about what she thought would be best and answer questions. Only one girl had issues to bring up, so the older woman spent most of her time assuring her that no, they would never attempt to ruin her makeup on purpose before her shots. Evergreen gave Mira a sideways look of disbelief. The white-haired girl had nothing to say. She assumed the young model must have gone to an unprofessional, if not jealous artist in the past, and was just anxious. Personally, the thought of having someone else do her photo-ready makeup and hair was a blessing. In the past, she'd always been told that her usual look, while gorgeous, needed to be turned up for the studio shots. It was a balance that she had mastered just in time to lose 7 years on the island. The artists made short work of the girls. Their final reflections were the perfect natural looks that they all knew were anything but natural. Final notes were made as the 5 girls thanked the artists. Their photographer's assistant called the girls over for test shots. It did not take long for each girl to get their headshots and full body poses completed. The assistant fawned over Mira only long enough to be chastised by the photographer. Evergreen found Mira's reaction to the stardom attained through her modeling career amusing, but didn't comment on it as they were hustled along to the designers. Each girl had all her measurements taken with relative ease. Aside from the numbers being thrown out every now and again, added growing pile, the designers were silent with their work. With each girl finished, they took the numbers and filed them away. "When will we know whose designs we'll be wearing?" asked one of the girls. "You should know tonight," came the answer. "We'll have line shooting for the spreads each day, so you should get your assignments with your schedule." The girls nodded. "Can we see some of the clothing?" asked another model. She blushed when she realized she had everyone's full attention. "Sorry, I'm just really excited. I love all your brands so much, and I can't wait to see what everyone gets to wear." A few of the designers smiled at her outward excitement. "Our outfits are all in the back right now. We unfortunately can't bring them out yet." The models nodded in understanding. After a few more questions, they were released for the day. Evergreen and Mira spotted Freed and moved to speak with him. "How'd everything go?" he asked. Bixel and Loxus moved over as well. "It went well," Evergreen nodded. "I don't see why we needed to get up so early, though. Now all I want to do is take a nap, but I feel guilty about this makeup." Mira giggled. "It went as expected. You 3 weren't bored, I hope?" "Freed made friends, at least," Bixlow stated. "Otherwise, nothing out of the ordinary happened. This might be harder than we thought." "There's no way the culprit would give themselves up on the first day," Freed said. "They've already had time to develop a strategy." The group looked around at the space around them. The last few groups of girls moved through the process much slower than the first. Mira saw the nerves on the youngest girls' faces. The boys suggested they look around one last time, stealing Mira's attention back. "Is there anywhere actually off limits on the set?" Evergreen asked. "Not anywhere you'd be kicked out for going, at least," Mira recalled. "I'm not used to a full indoor set. Since the building is theirs, I've assumed they've had it set up to be as easy as possible to navigate. I'm sure there are still back rooms and dark corners for someone to sneak around, though." "Loxus and I did a walkthrough of all the sets while you were getting your makeup done," Bixlow stated. "The place looks like what I'd expect. No one was creeping around in the corners, and no traces of errant magic caught our attention." "It's all very orderly," Loxus added, glancing around. "The only place we didn't check was the dressing room," Freed mentioned. "Why don't we check there now while it's empty?" Evergreen offered. Everyone nodded, and the boys watched them head to the changing room. They were indeed newly remodeled, and empty. "This place is fancy," Evergreen stated. Mira nodded and wandered around the corner into the room with full-length mirrors. Her reflection caught her off guard, but not as much as the second person in the room. "I'm sorry," Mira apologized. "I didn't realize anyone was in here." The other model seemed just as shocked and dropped her hands from where she'd been poking her face and neck. "I didn't even hear you come in." The other girl giggled over her embarrassment at being found out. Mira recognized her from the first group of girls. "It's really nice to meet you, Mary Jane. I'm Vivian, but everyone here just calls me V." It's nice to meet you too, Mira smiled. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just checking out the area, since the director said everything was remodeled. It is. It was way worse before. It was really only a set of changing stalls made of curtains against a wall. And to be honest, they didn't hide much. It was really uncomfortable when they did a high-profile shoot 2 years ago, and everyone had security around. Some of these guys were not as professional as you'd expect. This is so much better. Now the only guys who'll be in here are the designers and their assistants, and we all know none of them are going to be spying on us. Mira nodded as the model explained, wondering if she was one of the magazine's reoccurring models. She would need to see if anyone had old issues lying around that she could check. The girl's next question threw her. How do you still look so young and pretty? Vivian asked suddenly. I know there was magic involved, but it's been 7 years. How do you still look the exact same as you did? Do you have a special lotion you use, or a secret diet maybe? I'd love to know. It's so hard when they keep hiring younger and younger models. Nope, Mira smiled, embarrassed. All of it was magic. We were literally frozen in time, so I didn't age at all. Lucky, the girl pouted. That would be so cool. Mira was not sure how to respond, so she was lucky when she didn't have to. I have to go. It was great meeting you, Mary Jane. Hopefully we'll be shooting together tomorrow. Vivian waved and left the mirrored room just as Evergreen rounded the corner. The two FairyTail girls heard the door close and were left alone. Who was that? Asked Evergreen. Another model, Mira replied. She said her name was Vivian. It looks like she's worked here for a while. Evergreen shrugged. We could probably see if she knows anything about the girls who were affected with magic deficiency disease. Maybe she'll know something useful to get us started. Mira nodded. The two girls walked out of the room to rejoin the boys. Chapter 3. According to their schedules, Mira and Evergreen started their morning together at the first shoot of the day. The studio was abuzz with activity as the assistants hurried back and forth, moving equipment or relaying directions. It took all of Loxus's patience not to shout at the runner, who constantly scurried too close to where he stood along the edge of the room. He knew it would do no good, but it would make him feel better. An excited shout from the photoset drew his attention. The photographer called out again, and the flash went off several more times. Mira, Evergreen, and 6 other girls held their poses. The set was of an outdoor cafe complete with a fake storefront for an actual high-end coffee brand. The girls were posed as friends getting lunch, fake shopping bags piled high on one side of the shot for the brand they all wore. Mira Jane, honey, can you tip your... Yes, the photographer cooed. Can I get that fan moved to the left just a hair? The assistant scurried to adjust the wind effect, while another one fixed the lapels on one of the girls' jackets. She moved a single curl of hair on another model, but hesitated and put it back a moment later. The camera snapped again. Let's switch you two, the lead designer called. She was an older woman with a harsh gaze. The photographer let her move Evergreen and a short strawberry blonde girl to the front and seat them on a fake stone wall to the side. You, tip your sunglasses, the designer explained to a young model. She looked at the photographer. Can you see the patterning in the image now? The photographer snapped a test shot and showed the designer. Good, she nodded. The assistant swarmed the set to readjust the studio lighting to hit the girls' new positions, along with the natural sunlight from above. Mira smiled and watched the remaining models prepare for their shoots to the sides. A few of them seemed not to have a care in the world and lounged on the couches. Others paced or chatted amongst themselves. 2 of the newer girls watched the ongoing shoot and tried to imitate the girls' hand positions and expressions without being too obvious about it. Nothing seemed too out of ordinary so far. Girls, poses! The photographer called out. Each model returned to their full pose, and Mira reminded herself to relax her shoulders. The dress they had her in was cute, but higher cut than she was used to. The camera flashed, and they each shifted just enough. Eventually, one of their subtle expression shifts and muscle changes would result in the perfect photo. After 2 more adjustments by the designer and the photographer, they seemed to get what they needed. Mira and another girl were kept for close-ups on set. Evergreen wandered back to the changing rooms with the others. Freed walked with his teammate for a moment, and Mira spotted Bixlow chatting with one of the security men who worked for the building. That only left one member of their team unaccounted for. She felt his eyes on her before she saw him. Loxus stood nearby the set now. It seemed the blonde gave up on standing in the shadows and getting bumped into. He watched Mira and the photographer work to capture the new shots. It did not take long. Something wrong, Loxus? Mira asked as she stepped off the set and let the next girl up. The moment the bright lights were off her, she felt a wave of nausea pass through her. and she wobbled. Loxus put a hand out to steady her. "I'm fine," he stated, giving her a look. "It's okay," Mira replied. "I just need to eat something." "I don't feel any magic around," Loxus stated offhand. Mira gave him a smile and a sigh, leading him to the table with mini sandwiches and salad set out. "So, did you notice something else then?" Mira asked him. The cucumber sandwiches sat neatly piled on ice. She filled a plate. "Just the other security keeping a close eye on their girls. Freed suggested we should follow suit, since it's easy enough to see where everyone is otherwise," Loxus explained. With her mouth full, Mira could only nod that she understood. The food instantly soothed her and made her realize how hungry she really had been. Holding the plate out, she silently offered him a sandwich, wondering if he'd eaten yet. He declined. "It's been quiet so far." Mira nodded again. "It's only the first day," she shrugged. Their team might need to change up their current energy of simple observation to something more active if they had no leads by tonight. The day went on. The afternoon brought the first of the large group photos, the cliched swimwear spread. Half the girls wore one-piece, high-fashion, strappy selections. The others instead wore the traditionally sexier bikini styles. It did not surprise the FairyTail group that Mira wore a designer suit. It surprised Evergreen that she had one as well. The designers walked the girls through what they should emphasize in the posing of the studio shoots as the rest of the crew managers and security inched closer to watch. It was no secret that this was the shot they all wanted to ogle. The crisscross strapping around Mira's black and gold suit was different than what she was used to modeling, but it gave her a new set of poses to try out. With the photographer's direction, the camera flashes and pose changes came to her once more. The feeling she recalled at Pose-Off during the Grand Magic Games was nothing compared to what she felt now. She lost track of the other girls during their own shoots in nearby studios. Her only focus was the photographer and her own movements. Feeling her teammates' eyes along with the warmth of the studio lights did nothing to make her lose focus. Her hands found their places along her hips, caressing her collarbones above her head, all while making sure to show off the swimsuit as well as herself. She moved into her last pose, heard a single click, and then a thump. She hesitated, and her momentum broke. The world came back into focus. A blur of green and a shout immediately grounded her. Freed ran from where he stood with Loxus watching her to the next set over. Loxus was slower to break from his trance, turning to see what the commotion was and avoiding thinking about him getting just as caught up as her posing as she had. She spotted one of the smaller girls crumpled on the ground. A small crowd gathered. "Is she okay?" Mira asked, stepping closer. "What happened?" Evergreen appeared at her side, along with a handful of other models. "She just passed out," one of the girls explained. "She was going through her poses just fine, and then she stood up, wobbled, and went down. I hope she's okay." Evergreen nodded, but noticed that Freed seemed to be keeping the group calm enough by giving directions as he knelt beside the unconscious model. No one shooed him away to take his place, so the girl must have been here without a manager or anyone else to assist. A relieved gasp went through the crowd as she blinked and tried to sit up. Both Freed and the nearby photographer who joined him kept her from moving too quickly. The other models crowded closer and tried to be helpful. Freed opened his mouth to say something, looking overwhelmed. "Hey, give them some space," Loxus called out, beating Freed to the punch. His booming voice had the effect, and the crowd backed away a few steps. Freed gave Loxus a look of gratitude and helped the girl up, supporting her shoulders and helping her hold a small glass of juice one of the runners retrieved. The director hurried over, following one of his security. "What's going on? Is anyone hurt?" he asked nervously. A quick look around at the shocked faces seemed to make him even more panicked. "Everyone, let's take a quick break. Please return to the set in half an hour when we call you," he shouted, his voice jumping an octave. The girls were slow to disperse, but most everyone moved to the lounge area to stay out of the way. Freed motioned for the rest of the team to follow suit. He seemed to have things under control now that the assistants were over their shock and ready to help. "I hope she's okay," Mira said to Evergreen. "Yeah," Bixlow cut in. "She just fell over. It was crazy." "Do you think she was—" "I didn't feel any major magic spikes," Bixlow said. "What about you, Mira? You were right next to her," Evergreen added. Mira could only sigh. "Sorry, I was so in the moment I didn't notice anything." "Loxus?" asked Evergreen. He shook his head as well, otherwise silent. He looked away from them all, pretending to survey the room. They reached the lounge and walked into a very similar conversation. "She wasn't sick earlier today, no," said one of the girls. The dark-haired girl, Nessa, made a tisking sound. "Maybe she got hit with that weird magic disease thing. I heard rumors the last girl was in the hospital for a month." "No way! That's so scary! We can't get that unless we're wizards though, right? Is she one?" Mira and Evergreen stood at the edge of the circle, unsure what to tell the other girls, if anything. "Mira Jane!" Vivian called out in mock fear. She clasped the S-class wizard's hands in her own and said, "You didn't feel anyone cast any magic on her, right? You were right there." The other models quieted to give their full attention to Mira's answer. The white-haired girl supposed it should not have surprised her that they would know she was a wizard. She felt several sets of eyes fall to her guild mark, plainly exposed on her thigh. Evergreen's was half covered by the halter and ruffles of her swimsuit, but Mira knew the girls were smart enough to match the two symbols. Neither Bexlow nor Loxus had theirs on display, but Mira wondered how long it would take for someone to put the pieces together. They wanted to keep a low profile. This had truly blown their cover. They would have to wait and see what that meant for the mission. "I didn't notice anything unusual," Mira stated. "See?" Vivian smiled, turning back to the group. "If Mira Jane didn't notice any magic around, then it can't be that. I'm sure she just got overheated or something." The other model's smile and the obvious logic seemed to calm most of the girls. Vivian pulled both Mira Jane and Evergreen into the circle and sat them down on the carpet beside her. The other girls slowly picked up their conversations again, this time about more mundane topics. "So you're sure there wasn't any magic, right?" Vivian whispered to Mira. Evergreen leaned in as well. "We're almost certain, yes," Mira explained. Vivian's expression softened instantly. "Thank goodness. It was too scary at the last shoot. The girl didn't get up, and my uncle needed to call the emergency team to rush her to the hospital. Luckily, her guild knew someone to help her recover, but it was so nerve-wracking. The only good thing about it was that it happened on the last day of shoots." "She's okay now, right?" asked Evergreen. "Magic deficiency disease is really dangerous when it's a severe case like that." "Were you here for the other times it happened too?" Mira asked. "The other times?" She gave Mira a probing look. "We knew about this last incident, and the director mentioned it wasn't the only time. He wanted us to be careful," Mira said, avoiding the whole truth. "I hope you asked for a pay raise after you found out," Vivian stated, rolling her eyes. "My uncle can't help himself when he's around models he's trying to impress. He probably would have told you anything you wanted to know." "Your uncle is the director?" Evergreen asked. Vivian shrugged. "Oh yeah. He's my father's brother. I've been working for him forever. I was one of the magazine's first models." "So you would definitely know about the other cases," Mira smiled reassuringly. "Yeah, but..." Vivian hesitated. "We're not going to run off and tell anyone," Evergreen frowned, "but I'm sure you can understand why the two of us are interested in not getting a case of it." Mira nodded. Though, if worse came to worse, maybe the girls' advice would help them if they needed to bait the perpetrator into the open. "Okay," Vivian nodded. "It's only happened a few times, and the last one was by far the worst case. The other girls recovered within a week and were able to make it to the after party after all the shoots." "The other girls were each wizards, right? Do a lot of them come through each issue as models?" Evergreen probed. "Of course they were," Vivian laughed nervously. "Usually the swimsuit or the lingerie shoots give them away, if they don't already go around bragging about it. Obviously, most wizards prefer to model for Sorcerer's Weekly, but I've met a fair amount here." "Did you notice anything unusual about when it happened? New security, maybe? Flashing lights? Weird scents in the air? Anything?" Mira asked. Vi just shrugged. "Nothing too weird. The girls all mentioned they felt sick and were out within the hour. Only the most recent case was instant." "What about..." "Girls!" the director called out, interrupting Mira's next question. "I want to remind everyone to eat something. At the very least, we have juice and water on ice for all of you. There's a lot of new faces, and I'd hate for any of you not to be able to have your pictures taken because you passed out as well." "So, is she okay?" a brunette asked. "She's fine now," the director replied. "We're looking forward to seeing her for shoots tomorrow." The collective sigh was obvious. "Now, if I could get everyone to return to the studio, we're going to do the group shot before we go back to the catalog shoots you were doing." With the tension gone after the fainting scare, the girls happily returned to the set to finish swimsuit photos. Chapter 4. Loxus downed the drink and called for another one from the bartender. He was not used to missions like this. Just because he understood the benefit of not rushing into anything here did not mean that it was his first choice. Without any leads, physical force would only spook the models and probably get Freed, Bixlow, and himself kicked out. He did not have to think long to know how his grandfather would take that news. He walked back to the table with his new mug, arriving to laughter. "This guy's great! It's too bad you guys already work for your guild. We'd love to have you around for all the shoots," one of the other men said in response to Bixlow's story. Loxus accidentally rocked the table as he sat down. After the shoots ended that day and the FairyTail team finished dinner, the girls elected to turn in for the night. Bixlow let Loxus and Freed know the house security guys working that day invited them out to the local bar that evening. They were happy enough to go. What Loxus really wanted was to head out and get in some training, but for now, several rounds of drinks would suffice. The 3 security guys seemed welcoming enough. They were not wizards, but seemed to take it in stride when they figured out the boys were. All it took was 2 hours of drinks and a dumb joke for one of the men to spot Bixlow's guild mark and comment on it. After the truth was out, Freed stopped pulling at his sleeve cuff and let his own mark eventually show as well. It wasn't that they could deny it now, so they played it off as best they could so as not to let the drunk security guards connect too many dots. If they knew anything in regards to their mission, maybe they would let it slip. The door to the bar opened and one of the guys waved. He was feeling his drinks already, so the motion nearly smacked his coworker in the face. The boys quickly recognized the 2 men as another of the models' teams. Freed remembered talking to the shorter man yesterday. He was one of the other managers, Gio. They joined the table, pulling up the chairs and ordering another round for everyone. "So how about that scare today, guys?" Gio laughed. "My girls were pretty freaked out about it at first." "She ended up okay, right?" The bodyguard turned to Freed. "You were on top of that even though your girl was in front of the camera, and definitely on her game." He nodded appreciatively, and Loxus's brows furrowed. Freed waved the comment off and finished his next sip. "She's fine." As it turned out, she hadn't been eating because she was nervous about the swimsuit shots. She had a fainting spell. Luckily, she didn't get hurt when she fell, and seemed to be fine once the local physician arrived to check her over. The men nodded around the table. "Good to hear. After all that craziness after the last couple of issues, it's a relief this wasn't related." "I'm glad she'll be back. She's sweet. Single, too," one of the men stated. His partners whistled and elbowed him in jest. Just like that, the conversation came and went too quickly for the FairyTail team to get a question in edgewise without sounding like they were prying. A new round of drinks arrived, and the talk continued regarding the availability of the models. "Your girls are something else, Freed," Gio smiled. "Obviously, we all knew what to expect from Mira Jane, but your other girl, too. Yeah, Evergreen is. She's got that whole sexy secretary look down with those glasses, and someone is always looking for that type," Gio continued. He took another swig of his drink. "I tried to get some of my girls to go for that, since the work is pretty steady once they get it down. They all weren't into it. Makes my job more fun, I guess, getting them all gigs for stuff they want while convincing them that some of the lesser shots are worth it too." "I'm sure you don't have that issue with Mira Jane," the security guy beside him added. He smiled to himself, making an appreciative noise in his throat. The rest of the security team nodded in agreement. "I love the swim shoot," one of them stated. "It definitely brings out the best in the models. It's great how most of them like to show off." That much had been plainly obvious at the group shot. Even after the loss of the momentum from the fainting spell, the girls were more than happy to get back into posing. The photo was designed to be the centerfold piece, so the set they had built was enormous. Loxus commented about how overkill it seemed, but one of the assistants heard and was happy to set him straight on the marketability of a massive group of swimsuit-clad models. It took longer than they expected to get everyone into place and posed through. The set piece was a stone pool patio overlooking a backdrop of an ocean. The center contained a shallow wading pool with lounge chairs on one side and a garden patio on the other. Once they were all staggered properly, each ran through several poses with the photographer and the director until they were ready. The final image was enough to make anyone excited. This was for pure sex appeal, and everyone knew it. At the center, posed on the pool steps, was Nessa. Her black monokini showed off almost as much skin as the girls in regular two-pieces. Just like most of the other girls, her lips were pursed in a coy, "You know you want me" look. The 2 girls beside her mirrored each other. Mira posed next to the edge of the pool. The photographer urged her into a sexier pose, slightly bent forward with her fingers touching her hair while her left elbow pressed against her chest, emphasizing her cleavage. Her other hand ran seductively along her thigh, tracing just above her white guild mark. When the flashes began, she bit her lip and looked through her false lashes. Evergreen and Vivian had been placed on the other side of the pool. Ever lounged on one of the chairs in a deceptively natural pose that showed off her curves even more than her swimsuit could have alone. With everyone posed, the cameraman worked quickly to capture the final photo. An excited cheer rose up when he got it and declared it a success. "They should do more swimsuit features," one of the security guys sighed happily. "I'd love to see a few of those girls in something more modern." "You just want them in less," his buddy elbowed him. The two glasses clinked knowingly. "So, which girl are you going to ask out this time, Len? Or have you stopped doing that yet?" asked Gio. He leaned over to Bixlow, who sat next to him, and explained, "This guy's always made a habit of asking out the single models after the shoots. He's not very successful, but that never stopped him before." The man in question, Len, set down his drink and looked Freed dead in the eye. He was feeling his drinks for sure. "What do you think my chances are with Mira Jane?" he asked. The table roared with laughter. Freed, Bixlow, and Loxus displayed various looks of "Are you kidding me?" "Cut your losses now, man," Bixlow stated. He recovered most quickly, but the playfulness of the conversation was lost. "You saw her today," Len said, smiled drunkenly. "She was on fire. Can you imagine her?" "I would not finish that sentence if I were you," Loxus growled. His grip threatened to break the glass in his hand. Freed saw the first crack and was silently impressed that it hadn't shattered yet. "We can all agree that Mira is an excellent model," Freed placated. "You should probably set your sights somewhere else, though. Both Mira and Evergreen would be too much for you to handle. Trust me." The other men guffawed and raised their voices in drunken laughter and teasing. Len frowned, coming up with a retort. Loxus reiterated, "It's not a challenge." The deadly calm that exuded drove his point home, even through the other's drunkenness. "We've got enough to watch out for without keeping an eye on you too." The man threw his hands up in defeat. "Kill the mood, man," he muttered. "She's hot. I was just thinking out loud." Finishing the rest of his drink, "Looks like it's time to head back." The other security guys agreed and paid the tab after they finished their drinks. The FairyTail group left soon after. "Well, we know none of them are wizards," Freed sighed. "Guess that leaves one of the models or the assistants," Bixlow offered. "There's another manager, but I only saw him yesterday for a bit," Freed added. "I'm inclined to think it's one of the runners or the set design staff, just because the models are hired on for each issue and change out so often." The other two wizards nodded. Freed stumbled over the next curb into Loxus, muttering an apology. It was easily past midnight when they made it back to the suite. As they expected, Mira Jane and Evergreen were already asleep. The three men settled in. None of them bothered to ask about the girls' schedules the next day, so they'd let the girls wake them when they needed to be up. Loxus tossed and turned on the couch in the main room. The conversation and his reaction at the bar replayed in his mind. He wondered if the games made him feel more defensive towards his guildmates. Of course, he had known Mira longer than his actual teammates, considering they both practically grew up in the guild hall, but he'd never assumed he'd jump so strongly or quickly to her defense. Maybe she would like the attention from the security guys. How was he to know? He groaned, blaming the mission and his grandfather for sending him. The last thing he needed was to think too hard. He could feel the headache already. Hoping the next day would bring a tamer selection of outfits, the blonde forced his mind clear and eventually dozed off. Chapter 5. At least the designs weren't overtly sexy. Once again, Mira and Evergreen were among those chosen for the first shoot of the day. Unlike before, this one made them uneasy. "Are we sure this is a good idea with current events?" Freed asked the director. The man wrung his hands for a moment. "It was agreed to months ago," he sighed. "Honestly, I love the idea since the games held such a draw this year, but I see your concern. Trust me when I say that we've screened everyone in the building and have taken every precaution we can implement, including keeping the shoot a secret from the other models, just in case." Freed turned back to the set. The girls spoke with the designer. One by one, they motioned to pose, sometimes alternating if the designer shook his head. Besides, with Mary Jane here, I'm sure no one will try anything, even though they know which of the girls are wizards. Farid sighed and explained the situation to Bixlow and Loxus. The others were not thrilled either. The only benefit was that now they also knew who were the magic users. I don't know any of these guilds, Bixlow mumbled. If they even have them, Loxus added. On the set, Mira, Evergreen, and the 5 other girls moved into position. The studio had been built up to look like a rocky canyon, and 3 levels of rocks to create an almost movie-like shot. Mira Jane, you'll need to be down in front. I forgot your magic is transformative, so you can just pose as if you're ready to challenge someone instead of an actual attack. That would be most excellent. Mira nodded. The dress and strappy sandal she wore showed off a good deal of her legs, especially through the dual side slits. To be honest, the dress was more Juvia's style, especially if it came in blue or black instead of the red she wore now. She stood in front as the other girls around her maneuvered onto the fake rocks and built up levels. The young girl who passed out the day before, April, crouched behind her with her hands on the false stones. She was not part of a guild, but they were surprised to hear that she was in fact a wizard. That fact alone made Mira wonder if maybe her scare yesterday was more than just a dizzy spell. She seemed fine today, and they learned she had stone elemental magic, but was not interested in pursuing it further than the parlor tricks she knew already. Evergreen floated in the back, ready to pose when the cameraman called out to them. The sky-blue crop-top jacket she wore over the revealing white tank top and capris reminded them all of a cloudy sky. Of the girls, only 2 others were part of guilds. Their marks were on prominent display with their outfits, as were Mira and Evergreen's. Mira only knew one, Sunnyside, because of another model she had met years back. The guild had a beach bum reputation, though being in the southern resort town on the actual beach might have played a role in that stereotype. For Mira, the shot was easy enough. The other girls had difficulty. After an hour of changing poses and adjusting clothing, they finally got the shots they were looking for. The doors swung open after the girls were released. The cameraman clicked through his camera with the designer. Mira and Evergreen wandered over to the boys before they needed to change out of the clothing. I didn't think that so many models would actually be wizards, Evergreen sighed. I thought you and Jenny were just odd. And Lucy, too, Mira shrugged. She did not take her teammates' words as anything more than gentle teasing. Well, we all knew she was odd, Bixlow joked. That whole group has something wrong with them. They laughed. Why would anyone want to wear such expensive clothing on missions? Evergreen asked as she shrugged off the jacket. The director mentioned that most of the buyers would be guilds, who are looking for ideas for the Grand Magic Games, since everyone is planning for next year already. They aren't meant to be for everyday wear, Farid explained. The group nodded, seeing the logic of his findings. Mira and Evergreen noticed the other girls heading to the back to change, and moved to join them when they were interrupted. Great job, you 2, called a voice. Lee, the boy who had brought the initial request to the guild hall, came up to them with a clipboard in hand. He turned to the boys. You 3 are accompanying them to the terror shoot this afternoon, right? What? Bixlow asked. Of course, Loxus cut in. I thought that was here. Where are we going? Mary Jane asked. Just up the hill. The mansion in town has an elegant terrace and a garden that the magazine rented out for the occasion. The noise level of the room rose as the other girls arrived. The conversations that floated to them proved no one else knew much about the next set either. Are you sure leaving the studio is a good idea? Farid asked. This day seemed to be a disaster waiting to happen in terms of their mission. It's not a big deal, Lee tried to assure them. There's always an offset shoot per issue. Girls, come get ready for hair and makeup, the director called, clapping his hands together to get their attention. You 3 are good to go, then, Lee nodded, marking down something on his notes and walking off to find the other manager. I thought the director said all the shoots were here, Bixlow stated. He either forgot or he left it out because he wanted Mira to accept, Evergreen frowned. Personally, he seems like the kind of guy to... It doesn't matter now, Mira sighed. This might be our chance to flush the culprit, though, Farid said. We know which models are mages, so we need to keep a close eye on them. The group nodded, and Mira and Evergreen headed back to start the process of getting ready for the next shoot. None of the other models seemed to know much about the next shoot either when they were asked. They only knew that they were divided into groups. Evergreen was put with some of the newer girls, while Mira found herself with Vivian, Nessa, April, and another girl, Ray. The mood was light aside from the confusion. Only Vivian seemed to have qualms about the shoot. After their makeup and hair was done, April was whisked off with 2 girls from other groups. "Where are they going?" Nessa pouted suddenly. "Their schedules are marked differently, so they'll probably have the main outfits," Vivian replied. "Not fair," Nessa sulked. "She's so little." They all knew she meant young, since the girl could not have been older than 16. "Maybe the design only fits her," Mira suggested. Both Nessa and Vi sighed. The other girl, Ray, nodded, but was otherwise silent. Mira turned back to the mirrors. Her makeup was too strong for her liking, but she knew some of the shoots would have a more high-fashion-inspired look than others. The blue and silver on her eyes sparkled under the lights. Somehow, the hairstylist managed to tame her bangs into a soft side curl instead of simply tying them back like Mira always did. The rest of her hair rolled down her shoulders in waves. The other 3 girls wore similar styles. The only difference was color. Nessa wore purple, Vivian had emerald green, and Ray's was a burnt orange. "Come on, ladies, let's get you into these dresses," the designer smiled. "What are we wearing?" Nessa asked. "What's the theme?" "We have these beautiful formal gowns for each of you. Let's get them on and head up. We aren't the first group, but we're all going together." "What's April's dress look like?" Nessa tried to ask. "You'll join her shortly. The 3 of them will shoot their dresses first, so they're already headed up to the terrace. It's slightly too involved in my opinion, but the magazine director thought it would be different, so we're trying it." The woman continued about how she wasn't prepared to move formal gowns like this, while the 4 models agreed the dresses were beautiful. Each one was a solid jewel tone, shot through with silver thread to give them each a shimmery appearance. Mira's dress reminded her of the ocean at night, since the blue was so dark. The slit over her right leg made walking easier, at least, considering the height of the silver heels they had her in. She was certain that the other girls were just as happy as her that they did not need to walk to their destination even though the trip was short. When the Manor's terrace came into view, the girls let their excitement show. It was gorgeous. With all the models assembled in the main courtyard, the director called everything to order. Keeping watch behind them was a small army of assistants and security, including Freed, Bixlow, and Loxus. The director sent each group to their separate locations. The other 2 groups appeared not to have designer labels today. "I almost hope they host the wrap party here," Nessa smiled. "This place is huge." Vivian nodded. They rounded a corner and came to a set of stone steps surrounded by bright red flowers. The manor towered over them. More than the scenery, the girls were surprised to see April. "A wedding dress?" Vivian asked. "It's really plain," scuffed Nessa under her breath. "I think I like our dresses better." While Mira agreed the dress was rather plain in high fashion terms, it was still gorgeous, and April looked great in it. "Okay, girls," the photographer called. "I need you 3 over here." A sudden pain spiked through Mira's temple. It felt like the start of a headache, but the severity caught her off guard. She wobbled on the steps, catching herself at the last moment. She took a moment to breathe. "Mira Jane, you're here between us," Vivian stated. "Come on." "Oh, right," Mira nodded. Carefully, she got into place. The shot moved on as if nothing had happened, but Mira was on guard now. There was no reason for her to react as she had just done, unless it was a reaction to magic. She looked around the area between the camera's flashes. She almost didn't notice Loxus behind the cameraman's sunshield, but once she did, she noticed he also seemed to be on the lookout. She hoped he knew more than her, because there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary so far. It was hard to focus on modeling now, especially since the initial prick was back as a consistent yet mild headache. The other girls continued posing as if nothing was wrong. Mira hoped she just needed some water. They adjusted their setup after several more shots to include the nearby fountain. Mira took a moment to center herself and drink some water as the camera crew readjusted. Loxus appeared at her side. "Did you see anything?" she asked. "Nothing," he replied. "No one aside from the magazine group is here. The building is locked down to outsiders right now." He frowned. "I'm not sure what to even be looking for. No one here appears to be doing any magic, at least not a lot of it for me to feel anything." Mira made a face and touched her temple. The cool water helped, but she still felt the pinprick even though it was not as strong now. It was uncomfortable, but not something to make her worried that she was in too much danger. "What's wrong?" "I saw you on the steps, but," Loxus asked. He stared at her hand on her temple, and she quickly dropped it. "I'm starting to get a headache," Mira sighed. "I'm not sure if it's magic related or not, to be honest." Maybe Freight or Bixlow know something. They're watching Evergreen in the other chute, Loxus offered. Maybe. She moved back to the group, but paused and made a beeline to April first. The girl's eyes were closed, and her arms crossed over her body as if giving herself a tight hug. April, Mira stated, reaching out. The girl jumped at her touch, and then winced at her own quick movement. April tried to say. One of the assistants wandered over to them. "Oh, honey, you'll wrinkle the dress like that," he said, noticing April's stance. "Can you give us a quick second?" Mira stated. Her voice was more commanding than she intended, but the effect was the same. The young man shrugged and gave them some space. "April, are you okay?" Mira asked. "Do you need water?" "My head," she mumbled. "I feel sick." Her words were calculated to make the smallest movement possible, but they were all Mira needed to know. Nessa and Vivian laughed with the designer near the steps, and the cameraman reset for the new lighting. Ray was off chatting with 2 of the security guards. No one else seemed to be affected. "Loxus," Mira stated, "I think they're targeting us. Can you see if Evergreen or the other wizards are affected? They must still be nearby. I'm sure of it. I'll keep an eye out here." "You sure?" he asked. The sudden concern would normally have been appreciated, but she needed him to move. "Yes, go!" She didn't want him to draw too much attention to himself, but they needed to stop the culprit. He nodded and strode off. A quick motion to the magazine's own security was all he did before he left the area. Mira focused on the young model. None of their group had abilities that would be any help to her. None of them were healers like Wendy. It was impossible to even pinpoint what was affecting her so badly. Mira heard her name and looked over to see Nessa and Vivian turn to her. Looks of confusion and, was that fear, crossed the 2 girls' faces. Both models and the designer they spoke with hurried over. "Is she okay?" Nessa asked. There was just enough real worry to disguise the otherwise fake concern in her voice. April blinked and slowly unfolded her arms, taking a deep breath before looking at the concerned faces surrounding them. "I'm okay now," she said, somewhat surprised. "Are you sure?" "Maybe it's just nerves again?" April wondered aloud. I'm really better now. Thanks, Mary Jane." "Great!" The designer smiled, relieved. "Let's get this next shot set up then." She guided April to the fountain as she smoothed out the start of several wrinkles in the dress, expecting the other girls to follow. "Are you okay?" Vivian asked Mira as she put her hand on her shoulder. "Yeah," Mira nodded. I just have a headache. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you got too much sun." No, Mira sighed. "It's gone now. I must have been too preoccupied to notice it stopped." Vi shrugged, and they let the cameraman guide them back into place. Mira looked around for Loxus. Had he found the culprit and stopped them? Or maybe he spooked them and scared them away. Either way, both her and April were back to normal, though the young model looked less sure of herself now. The next hour passed with no missteps. Loxus returned halfway into the next set and gave Mira no indication he had found anything. She huffed, struggling to focus on holding her current pose. She had her hand on April's shoulder with Nessa, while Ray and Vivian held the fake bride's hands. How the designer figured out how to pose them all to show off their dresses was beyond Mira, but it worked. She was sure it looked like a shot from a bridal studio instead of a magazine, but Mira was too preoccupied to think too much about it. She couldn't get into her usual modeling mindset. She wondered if her headache and April's scare earlier was to blame. A literal jolt of pain took her breath away and left her instantly lightheaded. She recovered quickly enough, but April did not. The girl's knees buckled, and she tumbled backwards into the fountain. Nessa screamed out in panic. Even in her shock, Mira moved to cushion the young girl's fall, and the 2 of them splashed into the icy water. Shouts from the others were instantly muffled when the water closed over her face. The fountain was only 2 feet deep, but both girls' legs were stuck over the edge. Mira struggled for a moment, trying to find which way was up and get her free hand under herself to push them both back to the surface. Before she had too much time to panic, another splash reverberated through the fountain. She felt herself and April, who was supported against her right arm and shoulder, lifted out of the water and seated on the fountain's edge. Rivers of water ran down her hair into her face. Her bangs hung in her eyes, and she quickly pushed them away to check on April. "Is she breathing?" came Loxus's voice behind her. It took a moment for Mira to register that he stood in the fountain and had been the one to retrieve them. She could feel his discomfort with the whole situation, but she was glad he reacted so quickly. April coughed, choking on the water she no doubt swallowed. The other girls watched in horror from several paces back where they scurried to avoid the splash. "Go get help!" Mira shouted. When no one moved, she growled at the security team. "Find the director! April needs medical assistance!" The men jumped to comply as April struggled to sit up on her own. Mira held her shoulder, similar to how Freed had before. The others finally broke free of their shock and began to speak. "Is she okay? What happened? Are you too hurt? What about—" "Stop!" Mira frowned. She was soaked, upset about not catching the culprit, and now her ears rang with their questions. The group paused for only a moment before trying to ask their questions again. "Hey!" Loxus repeated Mira's command. He climbed out of the fountain and physically stood over the group. They backed off nervously just as the director rushed in with a small army of anyone available. "What happened?" he demanded. Two men with a makeshift stretcher hurried to the fountain and took April from Mira's arms to rush her off to someone who could help. "She just collapsed again," Vivian explained. "Mira Jane tried to help and—" "Great," the man huffed. He turned to Mira. "Are you okay?" When she nodded, he gave a single relieved smile. "You girls are done. There's food inside while you wait for the other groups to finish." He turned on his heel and hurried after April. "And don't tell the others yet." They all knew his request was in vain. "Do you know what happened?" Nessa asked Mira. The dark-haired girl gave Loxus a cautious look. He ran his hand over his hair to get what extra water he could out, but otherwise ignored the models now the current crisis was out of his hands. Mira shook her head. The dress clung to her uncomfortably. She reached down to unstrap her heels. "Did you bring a change of clothes that we could change into?" Mira asked the designer. The woman was still in shock at what happened. One of the design assistants spoke up as he handed Mira a small towel. "I sent someone to grab some clothing and towels for you two." "Thanks," Mira muttered. She patted the towel across her face before offering it to Loxus. When he didn't take it from her, she ran it through her hair, trying to curb the dripping water that ran down her back. "By some miracle, we got all the shots we were looking for," the cameraman announced. We should head inside." The relief of hearing those words seemed to break the designer's trance, and she joined the models as they headed back inside. Mira hesitated at the entryway. "You all go ahead. I'm going to stay out here in the sun until the new clothing shows up." Loxus waited with her while the others vanished. When they were gone, the blonde pulled off his shirt and wrung it out. Mira pushed aside her jealousy. She really wanted out of her wet dress. The fabric clung to her uncomfortably. At least the other security guys were gone now. With the look she noticed the one guy giving her, she guessed he would have loved to help her out of it. Not that the dress currently left much to the imagination. At least it wasn't white like the wedding dress. "How was Evergreen? Did Freed and Bixler notice anything?" Mira asked. The hand towel was soaked, so she wrung it out and draped it over the stone railing. "Neither of them noticed anything," Loxus explained. "I walked by another group to get to them, and they were all fine as well." "This has to be a short-range attack, then," Mira sighed. "Whoever knocked April out, I felt it too. One of us was targeted." Mira crossed her arms and huffed. "This is so frustrating. We haven't been able to do anything." Walking back and forth, she left a trail of dripping water from her evening gown. Eventually, she grew frustrated with the fabric and gathered it up, hiking it slightly too high. Luckily, Loxus had seen her in less and did not appear to be paying attention. Mira caught herself staring over him now. He stood in the sunlight, leaning against the railing. Water still dripped from his hair onto his face and down his chest. He opened his eyes as if feeling her gaze. "Just transform into something dry," he stated as if it were obvious. His eyes lingered slightly longer than she expected, but she didn't release the dress. "It doesn't work like that," she smiled. "I'd still be wet. Then that clothing would just absorb the water. It's better just to wait until they bring us towels." Loxus shrugged. As if on cue, a pair of runners appeared carrying a duffel bag. They handed it over, and Loxus opened it to discover 3 towels and several sets of mismatched clothing. "We didn't have time to dig through your suite for your clothing, so we raided the staff room. Hopefully we got your sizes right," one of them apologized. "Thank you. I'm sure they'll fit," Mira smiled. "Which way is the restroom?" "There should be one down the hall," the other runner said, pointing. Loxus and Mira nodded. The restroom was obvious enough, though they'd need to take turns since it was only a single room. Here, Loxus said. He handed Mira the bag and opened the door. The bathroom was just large enough, but once inside, Mira quickly realized she had an issue. She opened the door again. Loxus leaned against the wall across the way. He looked her up and down in confusion. "Can you unzip the dress?" Mira asked. He blinked twice, before nodding and walked over to her in the bathroom. Mira held her wet hair out of the way and turned her back to him. Finding and undoing the zipper was easy enough, but he wasn't prepared for the dress to not come off like both of them expected. Instead, he was left staring at Mira's shoulder blades and back through the open zipper. As much as his eyes threatened to trace her spine downwards, he held his gaze at her neck. "You forgot the hook at the top," Mira laughed, almost nervously. "Right." He fumbled with the small clasp for a moment before he finally got it unlatched. The dress opened. Luckily, Mira was smart enough to have her free hand over her collarbones to keep it from peeling off in front of him. Just because they were guildmates didn't mean she intended to give him a free show, especially since the dress had a built-in bra. Mira's cheeks colored. She turned to usher him out. "Thanks," she smiled, closing the door. As the latch clicked, she heard a whistle from down the hall. Letting her hair fall across her back and allowing her dress to unpeel itself, she hoped against all odds that the person who saw them was only Bixlow being obnoxious as she toweled off and slipped into the cute sundress in the bag. It was slightly too big in the bust, but it fit otherwise and was good enough until she got back to the suite. She supposed she could just transform into one of her usual dresses, but then she'd feel guilt that they'd tried to bring her clothing in the first place. Mira sighed and opened the door to find Loxus and one of the magazine's security personnel, the one who had been ogling her earlier. Her guildmate looked like he wanted to pummel the guy. "Your turn, Loxus," Mira interrupted. "Thanks," Loxus said. He gave the other man a look before stepping past her into the bathroom. "I'll take you back to the main room, Mira Jane," the security guy smiled. He held out his arm for her to take, but Mira declined. "I can walk myself," she grinned, throwing on an oblivious expression. She heard Loxus chuckle as the lock clicked behind her. The man brushed off her dismissal. "That's fine," he said. "This way, down the hall. We're just waiting on the last group." He walked with her in silence for a moment before showing her to the open room and the other girls. Before she could join them, he put a hand around her shoulder and whispered in her ear. "When you get sick of him, just let me know. I'll show you how a real—" "Oh, that's not—" Mira tried to say, interrupting him quickly. She really was not interested in knowing what made him a real bodyguard or a real man or any of the other lines she knew he'd try to use. "Don't lie now," he smiled, pulling her closer. "You wouldn't be the first angel to fall, and I won't tell your manager." Mira heard the emphasis on the word and only then noticed Freed in the room. He was talking to Bixlow and Evergreen at the far end. She wondered if he guessed the boys were just using cover roles or if he had been told. The man's breath on her ear reminded her that he was still too close. She was not in the mood to tell him off politely like he had probably expected, not after the day she had just had. It only took a second for Mira to shove him back into the empty hallway and shift into one of her demonic forms. Her claws gripped the man's shirt as she towered over him. His instant fear almost made her laugh. "I don't see any angels here," she grinned. The bathroom door down the hall opened, and Loxus stepped out. He noticed them both instantly, raising an eyebrow. Mira released the man and stumbled away. He threw Loxus a look. "You were right, man. You can have her," he called down the hallway. Mira transformed back and gave Loxus a look. "Kinda overkill," he said in reply. "It's not like I'm worried about blowing my cover. He seemed to know yours," Mira frowned. "They already know I'm a FairyTail wizard. Were you talking about me?" "I told him he couldn't handle you. I was right." Mira could have laughed, but her energy was lower than she expected. She was ready for a nap and to tell the director what she thought of his security personnel. The two of them joined the group in the main room. "What happened to your dress?" Evergreen asked as she greeted them both. "We had a mishap with the fountain," Mira explained. She lowered her voice. "April was attacked." "Did you find out who?" Freed tried to ask. "No." Chapter 6. A FairyTail group compared notes for the day. Evergreen's shoot occurred without issue. Her group's theme had been a casual garden wedding versus Mira's more formal event. The director let everyone know that April would not be joining them for the last 2 days of shooting. Because of her previous issue the day before, the models did not seem as perturbed as they should have been. The man gave Mira and others a look as if to say, "Why haven't you done anything?" but otherwise said nothing. Freed suggested, settling into the sofa. "Whoever it is, they must have been targeting you two. Otherwise, I'm sure Loxus would have noticed something." "But neither of us saw anything or anyone out of the ordinary," Mira frowned. "And our group was the only one in the area. The mansion was otherwise empty," Evergreen stated. She rested her chin on her hands. "They were the only 2 wizards in the shoot," Loxus added. "Unless someone is keeping their magic a secret and didn't tell the director," Bixlow offered. "If they didn't join a guild, there would be no way to tell." "True," Freed nodded. "But even if we find someone who's keeping their magic a secret, what's their motivation at getting someone sick and set off set? All the previous incidents happened after wrap-up and didn't have any long-term effects to either the magazine or the victims." "Maybe it has less to do with the outcome and more with the target?" Mira wondered. "If a model was doing this, well, sometimes they can just be petty." "But what if it's not a model?" Bixlow suggested. "Revenge, then? Maybe one of the girls turned down a contract or a date," Evergreen added. She gave Mira a look she'd have to follow up on later. "We need to start getting answers," Loxus frowned. "Yes, those reasons are great until you realize that all the victims are wizards," Freed said. "Those odds are slim. I don't think we're getting all the information here." They nodded. "So what's the plan?" Bixlow asked. "We need to ask some questions. Mira and Evergreen, you two should talk to some of the girls and see if they've seen anything. Maybe start with the models in your shoot this morning. We can ask around downstairs." They nodded and headed out. Once the boys left, Mira and Ever encountered their first issue. "How do we know which rooms they're in?" Evergreen started to ask as they walked down the hall. Laughter filtered through a door further down, but most rooms were silent. They spotted a door with a sign and paused. "Let's start here," Mira said. The sign on the door was a wooden cutout piece hung at eye level. It read Nessa in pink, glittery script. "But I don't think she's worked here before. She must know something," Mira explained. The S-Class wizard knocked. After a moment, Nessa opened the door and gave the 2 of them an initial surprised look. "Mira Jane! You're just the girl I wanted to talk to." She smiled after getting over her shock. "And you are?" "Evergreen," the wizard introduced herself. "Right. So Mira Jane, you and that blonde bodyguard, huh?" Mira flushed as she followed Nessa into her room. "What did you say?" Evergreen asked in shock. "Loxus?" Nessa plopped on the sofa and motioned them both to follow. "I heard you two were spotted together at the shoot today. In the bathroom." Nessa grinned. Her eyes sparkled with potential gossip. "He's hot. I can see why you'd want to—" "It's not like that," Mira panicked. She knew she blushed bright red. Evergreen gave her a perplexed look. "Was this before or after you got hit on by that other guy?" her guildmate asked. "How?" "I don't wear glasses because I'm blind, Mira. I saw you two from across the room before you ducked into the hallway, where I hope you beat his sorry—" "Was it Len?" interrupted Nessa. "He hits on all the models, but usually it's after the shoot, at the after party. He's tall with brown hair and has a weird nose." "Yeah, that was him," Mira nodded. "But I told him off, and I doubt he'll try again." "So who told you about me and Loxus?" "So it's true?" Nessa asked, grinning. "No, it's not. I just needed help with my dress and—" Sure, Nessa waved away her words. "Marco told me. I assume Len complained to him after he'd been rejected." "Who's Marco?" asked Evergreen. "Oh, he works with the security team. I think he thinks we're serious, so he tells me all the best gossip around here. But that's a whole nother story. There's no way I'd do another gig here with what I can make at other places. So I just needed someone I wouldn't need to worry about ever seeing again." "So you've worked here before then?" Mira clarified. "Not during the last issue, but the 2 before that, yeah." "Do you know what happened to the other girls who got sick?" Evergreen asked. "They were both new girls who were younger without too much experience. I really didn't get to know them outside of the shoot we were grouped in." "Why?" "We were worried," Evergreen lied. "I wouldn't be. It's usually only 1 girl per shoot this happens to. It's never been life-threatening." "Do you think the other girls were connected somehow?" Mira asked. Aside from being young, pretty, and picked by the designers more than the rest of us, no. But every shoot has models like that, and both of you are older than her, so I think you'll be safe. That's good then, Mira smiled. The FairyTail girls turned over the information in their minds as they excused themselves. Thanks, Nessa. No problem, she said. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's designs. You got your schedules, right? We haven't looked. You'll like it. Oh, and don't tell Marco I told you guys about not being a long-term thing. Of course, Mira nodded. Luckily, neither of them was interested in the other girls' hookups and weren't even sure who this Marco guy was. The door closed, and they were left in the hallway. Who's next? Mira asked aloud. She gave us a decent lead, Evergreen stated, and April matches that profile. Though that also means we missed our chance if only one girl gets targeted. Let's see which rooms the other wizards are in. Instead of knocking on all the doors, Evergreen remembered the communication lacrima, and they called down to the front desk with a lie about needing one of the girls' room numbers to return something. Lee answered and was otherwise flustered, but he showed them the room list. It was hard to see all the names through the lens, but they wrote down a few and thanked him. They continued their search. The boys beat them back, but did not have anything they didn't already know. The only excitement they had to share was their encounter with Marco, Len, and Gabriel on their way out. Apparently, Marco and Gabriel assumed Loxus had gotten with Mira and were eager to embarrass their buddy. It was an awkward situation all around, which was luckily avoided rather quickly when Len stormed out. The blonde still bristled at their teasing remarks. Nessa didn't seem to think there would be any more issues, Mira stated. The other girls we talked to didn't seem to be worried at all by today's attack. Though, the one wizard told us she has her guild on guard if she didn't make contact each night. She wasn't overly worried, but she said something about extra check-ins were worth it for safety. Evergreen sighed. Aside from her, I don't think the others are taking the threat very seriously. Why would they? Freed mumbled. The director is doing a great job downplaying everything. It's like he's covering something up, Bixlow mused. Loxus nodded. Why wouldn't he, though? Mira asked. He doesn't want mass panic if the girls think they're in danger. The group thought about Mira's words for a second. You said the other model mentioned the targets were up-and-coming younger girls, right? Freed asked. Ever and Mira nodded. Let's keep an eye on them tomorrow and see if a knock on the door interrupted him and an envelope made its appearance under the door. I'll get it, Mira said. She picked up the envelope and opened it to find an updated shoot schedule. It says they've switched my shoots tomorrow. I'm going down earlier now. I wonder why, Evergreen mused. Mira could only shrug. She had not looked at her old schedule to see what the actual difference was, but it didn't bother her anyway. The next morning, Mary Jane quickly discovered why she needed to come down when she did. As it turned out, April had been the intended model for one of the main items, and with her down for the count, they needed a replacement. The only problem with picking Mira was the obvious one of sizing. The designers did not seem too upset. Freed stood nearby as the designer and his assistants pinned and made minor fit adjustments. What would I have yawned? Trying to hide her yawn. She stood in a soft pink silk nightgown. It appeared to have been altered to accommodate April's less busty figure already, so the changes to let it out were simple enough. The other designs are various pant, skirt, and tunic combinations. This one has a plush robe as well, but obviously that won't need fitting. Mira nodded. Why didn't you pick one of the other models with the same proportions as April? Mira wondered. I thought about it, the designer hummed, but then I realized they wouldn't be able to bring this vision to life. I already spoke with the photographer about what I want for this set, and my assistant and I knew that you could pull it off best after we saw you at the swimsuit shoot. Mira nodded absent-mindedly. It wasn't an underwear shoot, but she got the vibe that it could quickly devolve into one. Who else is in this set? Mira asked. She knew Evergreen wasn't. In fact, her guildmate only had one design today for the basic catalog shoot. I know I'll find out soon, but I was just curious. The designer snapped at one of her assistants, and she produced a list. Nessa, Vivian, May, Amy, Megumi, and Sasha, she recited. Mira knew most of the names to be the young girls. Mira knew most of the names of these models by now. All right, the designer said. I'll make these quick changes, and it'll be ready for the shoot shortly. Thank you, Mira said. She walked with Freed to the lounge, sitting on the couch and closing her eyes. She sighed. The door opened, and the first of the girls trickled in. It was still 10 minutes to the first call. That must be the studio they're using today, Freed pointed. Mira spotted the white bedroom set. To be honest, it reminded her more of a lingerie shoot than an elegant loungewear one. A few of the others joined her in the lounge to wait. When they had all gathered and were ready to go, they were ushered to hair and makeup and then onto their clothing. "How'd you get so lucky?" Vi pouted when Mira slipped into the altered piece. "Were you not supposed to have this main design?" Nessa questioned. The other girls quieted to listen to the three top models. "I didn't originally," Mira started to say, "but I was asked to step in." Both Nessa and Vivian frowned. They had little time to argue as they were called to the set. By now, the others started arriving for the other photos as well. Evergreen and the boys meandered in as well. Mira sat on the plush comforter of the bed, the fuzzy robe around her shoulders and her legs tucked up under her. Around her, the others were staged. It was intended to look like they were staying overnight and having too much fun in their designer PJs. The result was mixed. Eventually, they switched the girls' places, and Mira found herself pulled back into the lull of her own poses. The robe inched off her shoulders, and the nightgown bunched at her thigh as she shifted to extend her leg off the bed and lean into the bedpost where Vivian stood. Obviously, the full night of sleep she got was enough to restore her energy. There was no lingering sign of the headache from yesterday, which made focusing on her task that much easier. She felt the gathering crowd's eyes on her as she slipped into another pose. The camera flashed. Directions were called out for the other girls. The designer reset them all to highlight a different aspect and moved Mira so she stood at the foot of the bed. At this point, the S-Class wizard was happy to strike a different pose. Her teammates watched from the sidelines as she moved with each camera flash, feeling the rhythm she had lost yesterday. In the back of her mind, she felt a twinge. Adjusting poses again, she reached out to touch the bedpost near Vivian and another model. As if the floor dropped out from under her, Mira's knees suddenly buckled. Luckily, she didn't tumble onto the bed, but her jolt did not go unnoticed. "Are you okay, Mira Jane?" called out the designer. The other models gave her a worried look, smiled guiltily. "I'm fine. I just shifted on my ankle wrong," she lied. She straightened into her pose again, but her moment was lost. The gentle pulse in her temples grew. After a few more moments, the designer called the shot complete and released the girls. Mira made her way carefully to Freed and the others. Evergreen was gone, most likely getting ready for her next shoot. "Are you okay?" Freed asked. "This headache from yesterday is back," she admitted. "And just now, I felt like all my energy drained out of me." "Do you think the culprit is targeting you now?" Freed mused. "Can you still use your magic?" Bixlow asked. Mira pulled her robe over her shoulders and walked through a simple transformation. When she opened the robe again, she wore one of her favorite dresses. "It appears so," Mira nodded. She shifted back into the nightgown. "Though I'm not sure I could hold one of my stronger takeovers for long. I felt fine until a few minutes ago." "I'm going to look at the set," Loxus said. Mira watched him go. The bedroom was empty now. A single light lit the set as he meandered around it, touching the props. She noticed how carefully he moved around the room, lifting the pillows and touching the bedpost she nearly fell into. Her mind wandered dangerously. Imagining Loxus in a bedroom was the last thing she needed to be doing right now. "Mira!" Nessa called across the studio. "The designer wants the gown back, whenever you get a chance." "Coming!" Mira called. She steadied herself after another wave of lightheadedness hit her. Freed and Bixlow watched with confusion. "Are you sure you're okay?" Bixlow asked. "I'll be fine," Mira reassured him. "We need to catch this guy. I can deal with a headache if it proves they're nearby." "I'll look into a script that might help bounce the effect back to the caster," Freed suggested. "There has to be a set of runes to do that. I can't believe I didn't think of it sooner." Mira nodded and walked back to the changing rooms. She changed out of the nightgown and moved to watch Evergreen from her spot on the sofa. Sitting made her confident that she wouldn't pass out at least, if worse came to worst. Her guildmate had on a form-fitting, long-sleeved dress. Mira expected to have something similar. She tried to remember and pinpoint the feeling she got during her shoot. She didn't get very far. Vivian sat down next to her on the couch with a handful of baby carrots. She offered Mira one. It might have been the makeup, but Vivian appeared to be glowing. "You okay?" Vi asked. Mira accepted the carrot and nodded. Vivian put a hand on the wizard's shoulder. "I'm fine," Mira promised. "I just needed a moment off my feet before the next shoot." Vivian gave her a skeptical look and finished off the carrots, but did not want to press further. "So how'd you end up getting April's spot?" Vi asked. She watched Evergreen switch with the next girl and stopped to talk to Bixlow. "What? How did you know April was supposed to get the spot?" The designers all have a master list, the girl shrugged. Mira felt the statement was not completely truthful, but had no way to prove it. For all she knew, V's uncle could have left his list out and she happened to cross it. The designer said she felt I could bring her vision to life best, Mira explained. Hopefully I did it justice. I'm sure you did, Vivian smiled. Everybody loves you. Did my uncle ask if you're staying on for the next issue yet? Mira shook her head. He didn't. Maybe he talked to your manager, April said, hesitating for a moment. Mira gave her a look. She felt a wave of lightheadedness and steeled herself. She really did not want to pass out on Vivian, or anyone for that matter. So what's your next set? Do you have a catalog piece you're doing? Vivian asked, oblivious to Mira's zoning out. Oh yeah, not for a bit though. You? I'm up soon, actually, Vivian replied. I just wanted a snack and to recharge a bit. Good luck, though I'm sure you won't need it, Vivian called over her shoulder as she hurried off. Mira pressed her fingers to her temple and eased the tension from the blooming headache. Evergreen appeared after she changed with another plate of food. Headache? She asked. The wizard lowered her voice. Do you think it's another attack? It has to be, Mira nodded. It's better now, though. She took one of the finger sandwiches from Evergreen's plate. Freed said he'd work on something to help, so hopefully that'll work. It's fading now, at least. You still have some time before your shoot, right? Mira nodded. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The three girls doing their shoots switched out. Eventually, Freed joined them. Done, he smiled. It took more time than I first assumed, but if someone targets you again, their attack should bounce back. That way we'll know who it is. He presented Mira with a thick bracelet. I've put the enchantment on this. As long as you're wearing it, it should work as expected. If I had more time to account for everything, I could have wrote something for you directly, but this will work just as well. Hopefully the designers like it and don't make you take it off, Evergreen stated. It should be fine, Freed shrugged. I spoke with your next designer and she didn't seem to have an issue. The call for the next few girls was announced. Evergreen made herself comfortable as Mira slipped the bracelet on her wrist. Wow, she said. What? Freed asked. Is something wrong? No, my headache vanished. This is great. Freed visibly breathed a sigh of relief. And now we wait. His statement was supposed to refer to waiting for another attack, but they ended up waiting for Mira's turn far longer than they realized. The girls leading up to her time slot struggled to work with the camera team, and in turn threw off the schedule. Waiting with her hair and makeup touched up in an elegant dress, she watched the other girls. Evergreen and Bixlow waited in the lounge with Loxus and Freed. The studio was mostly empty at this point. Only the camera crew and the designer remained. Most of the house security personnel had retreated to the staff room in the back. They were still within earshot if something happened, but they all knew the wizards could handle themselves. Finally, it was Mira's turn. With the time she had to herself, she felt refreshed again. She greeted the woman with a smile. It was the designer she was most excited to impress, Blockay. Ah, Mira Jane, the woman smiled. Thank you so much for your patience. If I knew it would have taken so long to pose these newer girls, I would have... Don't worry about it, Mira smiled. I liked the break. The rest of my team might not agree, though. A young woman noticed the others in the lounge for the first time and laughed with Mira at the joke. Well, this shouldn't take too long, she said. As if to prove her point, Mira's experience made getting the right shots on her first go easy. The designer was thrilled and let Mira know she'd love to work with her in the future. Her guildmates met her as she came off the set. That would be amazing, Mira agreed. The designer mirrored her smile, eyeing the four others. You're one of the other models, correct? She asked of Evergreen. The wizard nodded. Do you three model as well? The designer asked the boys. No, Loxus replied. Well, would you be willing to try? What? Bixlow asked. All of them looked to the designer in surprise. She glanced away for a moment. The camera crew had not left yet, but they seemed to be almost done packing up. I was hoping there would also be male models around to steal for a side project, but it looks like I was wrong, she sighed. I have the matching set of male designs for this set stored in the back. Would you be up for letting me take a few test pictures? My advertiser wasn't sold on the mixed look, but I'm sure I could convince them with an example. You know we aren't models, though, Freed explained. His expression was a mix of nerves and excitement. The designer waved his fears away. Obviously, she laughed. I'm not expecting a stunning photo, just a base I can use to sell my idea to a new set of eyes. I'm almost certain you'll fit in what I have with me." They were silent for a moment. "What's the harm?" Evergreen laughed. "You guys get to see that modeling isn't as easy as it looks." "Great!" the woman exclaimed. "Come with me." She led them into the empty dressing room and rolled a small covered trunk into sight. Loxus hung back. Freed and Bixlow seemed to be caught up in the idea now. The designer pulled out the first suit. "They're modern suits with old-school lines," she explained. She gave Freed the first one and dug in the pile. Bixlow was next. The pinstriping on his was subtle, while the silver buttons on the cuffs stood out. "Go try those on," the designer ordered of the boys. Turning to Evergreen, she said, "Your dress from earlier is on that rack. Can you put it back on?" Evergreen nodded. Her hair and makeup were still mostly in place. "As for you," the designer mumbled, looking at Loxus, "if this one fits, I'll die beyond happy." She pulled a dark charcoal suit from the bottom of the trunk and held it up. The look of glee she wore was too much. "Put this on." "I haven't agreed," Loxus tried to say. "Please, you'll be perfect," the designer pled. "Mira Jane, tell him." Mira froze at being put on the spot. The suit Loxus held was crisp and beautiful. She had no doubt he would look great in it. Before she could tell him to try it on, the boys beat her to it. "Just put it on, man," Bixlow stated. "You'll look great," Freed added. Mira nodded. Freed and Bixlow stood for the designer as she waved Loxus away and examined the fit of their suits. After a few tucks and hidden pins in their proper places, the designer nodded and surveyed her work. "Wow," Evergreen nodded. "They're right when they say all men look better in suits." Freed bowed playfully. "Come on, Loxus," called Bixlow, teasing. "I know you know how to put on a suit." "Shut up," growled Loxus. He appeared from the back with a frown, fumbling with the front buttons. "Wow," Mira heard herself say. Evergreen whistled. The designer cooed over him, adjusting the lay of his lapels and pulling on the shoulder panels. "You all look great," she smiled. "Now, come with me. We'll just arrange this set a bit." She pulled the chair and the bench into place on the studio and flicked on the warmer of the 3 lights. "They took the camera," Loxus noted. "That's fine," she smiled. "I have a personal one. I didn't expect to get official photos or anything." "So what are you looking for us to do?" Mira asked. The woman chose a studio set with a plain wood grain backdrop. The winged chair and matching bench made them think of an old-school writing office. All it needed was a desk and a bookshelf. The designer smiled. "Think mob boss," she explained with a grin. It surprised no one when she motioned to the tall blonde. "That's you. Sit here." She positioned Loxus facing forward in the chair and built the scene around him. "I want you to channel power," she told them all. She stood Freed and Bixlow on each side of the chair, giving them specific poses to show off the suits. Power and confidence. The designs might be based on old-school looks, but they're made for the modern client. You're in charge. Make me believe it. When she finished getting them in place, the designer sat Evergreen on the bench in front of Bixlow. She tipped the wizard's chin and suggested touching her glasses in a look that said, "You think you're on my level?" "Obviously, you girls need to embody the same confidence as the boys. These outfits are not made for women who can't take charge. Yes, I want you to look beautiful, but you are also powerful, and you know it. Now, Mira Jane, I'm going to have you sit here." She patted the arm of Loxus's chair. A quick look at Loxus was the only warning Mira gave him before she scooted up next to him, her legs dangling to the side, and Freed moved to not be blocked by her knees. The designer frowned. She muttered, looking between Loxus and Mira. "You two are comfortable around each other, right? Mira Jane, can you swivel around to the other side and loop your legs over his knee?" No one moved while they let the designer work the new position in her head. "You want them to do what?" Freed finally asked. Mira heard the change in his voice, almost jealous of the half-described pose. She would have laughed to herself if she was not the one to be in the compromising position. "It'll look great," the designer promised, "and it will show off the dress's ability to keep its form in an unusual position. Just swivel your legs this way." Mira gave Loxus an embarrassed look and turned to face him. The designer looped her legs over his closest knee and waved Freed back into place. She stood back and examined the setup so far. She motioned to Loxus, taking his left hand and bending it up. "Lean your chin," Not so much. On this hand. Look directly forward. Yes. Now this hand goes here, she said, placing his right palm on Mira's hip. She jumped at the initial contact. Sorry, Mira said. I haven't actually worked with anyone like this before on a photo set. I usually do solo poses. The designer waved her nerves off. You look great, she stated. Most models aren't used to it at first either. I do want you to lean in slightly and put your hand on his shoulder, though. Mira hesitated before she complied. The warmth of his hand at her hip was distracting. Try touching a bit of his hair instead. There, the designer smiled. Boys, your positions? She pulled the rather large camera from where she had looped it around her neck and stood back. Remember that chin tilt, the designer called to Evergreen. The camera flashed. Pop that hip to the front just a little more, she motioned to Freed. Shoulders back. Freed straightened up, reminding himself not to pull his crossed arms too far up, like she had already warned him. To Bixlow, she instructed him to give a slight grin out of the corner of his mouth as he faked adjusting his sleeve cuffs to show off the buttons. And finally, she pressed Loxus's toes out so he looked less stiff. His wide stance was visibly reduced by Mira's thin legs, one curled up under his knee and the other positioned to the floor between them. Mira hoped that everyone was too distracted by their own instructions to notice how much she had to control her own breathing. The door squeaked open, but Mira assumed it was one of the security guys coming back to check the room. Luckily, no one appeared to see them posed on set. She focused back on the lock of Loxus's hair curled in her fingers. The pressure on her hip reminded her that he felt the movement, and she nearly pulled away. Loxus relaxed the tension on his shoulder where she leaned and glanced up at her out of the corner of his eyes. She returned his gaze, reminding herself to breathe slowly. Popping her shoulder and melting deeper into her pose, the camera flashes faded. What felt like ages must have only taken a few minutes once they were posed. A high-pitched squeal pulled her attention. The designer took one last picture and the shoot was over. Mira blinked and felt the world come back into focus around her as the group dropped their poses. She looked around for the cause of the sound, but saw nothing. I knew you would be perfect, the designer smiled. Thank you so much. You boys should be models too, you know. Freed and Bixlow laughed, unbuttoning the suits as they returned them. Evergreen followed. Mira, Loxus said. She glanced at him. He gave her a look and bounced the leg she still leaned against. Oh, sorry, she blushed, leaping to her feet as so he could get up. Loxus nodded in thanks and got up to follow the others. It didn't take long for them to change and return to their room upstairs. Well, that was interesting, Bixlow said when they were alone. She really seemed to like you guys, Mira smiled. It was fun, Freed nodded. He was obviously still excited from the experience. Hopefully that ends up being what she needs. Mira agreed. She was sure her face was still flushed from the thought of being posed almost in Loxus's lap. How many times had she thought about a situation like this when she'd been crushing on him years ago when they were younger? Taking a deep breath, she tried to relax. Chapter 7. Did any of you notice anything strange at the end of the shoot? Mira asked. I thought I heard someone come in, but I didn't see anyone when we were done. I didn't notice anything, Evergreen shrugged. Maybe it was your imagination? I might have heard a door open, Freed suggested. Why? Did you feel another attack? No, not at all, Mira assured him. The bracelet works great. I didn't feel anything weird, but I did hear something. Are you sure none of you noticed? Was that what brought you out of your modeling zone? Evergreen asked. You were really into it, just like at that earlier shoot, but then you snapped out of it and seemed distracted. Yeah, Mira nodded. She ducked her head and asked, Am I that obvious when I'm feeling the poses? Evergreen laughed. Everyone mentioned that you seem to get really into your sets in front of the camera, but I don't think they can tell when you fall out of it, she explained. I'll take a look around, Loxus offered, bringing the conversation back. It's probably nothing, but maybe something will turn up. I'll take a look downstairs again. He left the suite. Just as he closed the door, the communication lacryma lit up and the director's voice came through. Mary Jane, are you available right now? Of course, Mira stuttered. The voice initially made them all jump. What can I help you with? If you have a moment, can I meet you in the lobby in a few minutes? I have things I'd love to go over with you. I'll be down shortly, she called. The lacryma faded and Freed turned to Mira. Do you want me to come with you? Mira pursed her lips. If he wants to talk about the modeling contract with him, then you're welcome to join. I can't think of any other reason to have a private conversation. I'll walk down with you. If you don't need me, I'll assist Loxus. Freed smiled. Bixlow and Evergreen chuckled, but did not stop the two as they left the room. The lobby was strangely quiet, though all the lights were on. The receptionist was nowhere to be found. They walked to the office door they recalled from the first day and knocked. Seconds ticked by with no response. This is the door, right? Freed asked. Mira nodded. They looked around, but no one was there. I'll see if he left a note on the receptionist's desk, Freed suggested. He left Mira in front of the door and rounded the corner. Mira knocked again, her hand on the knob. Hello? Her wrist reflexively twisted, and she found the door unlocked. The room was empty. Freed, she called. It's unlocked. She wasn't sure if he could hear her in the carpeted hallway, but she walked into the room and moved to the desk to take a seat. As she did, the door clicked closed. Mira jumped when she heard her name, turning in the chair. Mira Jane, thanks for coming down, Vivian said. V? Mira asked. I was just waiting for the director. No, you aren't, V smiled. I called you down. The other girl walked into the room towards the desk, then changed her mind and stood near the windows. So why? Mira started to ask. Because I wanted to ask how you scored a private modeling piece with Blockay. She isn't known for playing favorites, so what's your secret? What are you talking about? Mira asked. I didn't... Oh. How did you know about that? No one was there when she asked us. Unless... It was you I heard come back in? Vivian stared hard at Mira for a moment, almost as if she needed to weigh her options. It's true, I was there. I didn't think anyone saw me, though, especially not you, since you were so into your pose. It almost made me believe that rumor security's been talking about, involving you and your guildmate. Mira felt her cheeks go red before she caught V's word choice. What did you call Loxus? She asked. Your guildmate, V repeated. You know, since you're all FairyTail wizards. And the only reason a group of wizards would be on set is to catch the guy behind the attacks, right? Was that how you convinced Blockay to work with you all? Setting a trap, maybe? How did you know they're also in the guild? Mira asked. Sure, Evergreen and I were outed during those 2 shoots, but I'm not dumb, Mira. If anyone should know not to underestimate a model, it's you, V snapped. I heard the security guys yesterday talking about how they could slack off since the guys from FairyTail are working on it. And since it's common knowledge that's your guild, it made sense they'd be your guildmates. So seriously, how did you get Blockay to work with you? That's the biggest designer label in this issue. So if you have more shots... It wasn't something for the magazine, Mira explained. She asked for help with a side project, just a promotion for her menswear line, and the boys agreed. I had nothing to do with it. As if... Just so you know, the girl who was attacked before April also got special treatment from one of the designers, so I'd watch your back. The model stared hard at Mira. Is that a threat? Mira frowned. V winced, broke eye contact, and gritted her teeth. Of course not, Mira reasoned, because I can't see why someone would want special treatment from a designer if that meant they'd become a target as well. She knew Vivian was jealous of her current spotlight, but when that spotlight also meant having a target on her back, she couldn't see why. Vivian waved her off. It's just because you're a wizard. I'd be fine. It would probably be better if the designers gave me extra shots, since I'd be protecting everyone else. Why don't you think the attacker wouldn't turn on you? Mira asked. Because he hasn't in the past, V shrugged. Why would he change his tactics now? But seriously, why haven't you caught him yet? That's why you're really here, right? Mira was silent. Of course that's why. Why else would there be 5 of you? Vivian asked. I'm sure the only reason my uncle let all of you on set was because he really wants you to sign an exclusive contract. Can you imagine? Mira Jane Strauss, Fiore's top model and member of the winning Grand Magic Games Wizarding Guild, working exclusively for his little magazine. Vivian rolled her eyes. He offered the opportunity to one of the girls last term, and she almost said yes. But in the end, she wasn't able to accept. Just like you won't. Mira had a sneaking suspicion that the girl who ended up in the hospital during the last shoot was the girl she was referring to. The FairyTail wizard also knew that all the high-end magazines had their own exclusive models. Even if the contract was only for a year, it gave readers a reason to keep buying the magazine. "Was your only reason for calling me here to threaten me?" Mira asked with a frown. "I had no intentions of signing a longer modeling contract with your uncle." "Had?" Vi asked. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed working with the designers and being in front of a camera," Mira explained, lifting her chin with an air of pretentiousness. "Maybe I'll come back to modeling full-time." She hoped Vi couldn't see through her lie. The S-class wizard had no intention of leaving the guild she loved to pursue a full-time modeling career, but she wanted to know why Vivian was so insistent on her not signing the contract. In the back of her mind, she wondered where Freed had vanished to. "Look, Mira, I'm worried about you," Vivian sighed. Her whole demeanor instantly relaxed. No longer did her words hold venom. Instead, they were carefully controlled. "After what happened to April, and then you almost collapsing on set today, I think you're being targeted too. Why would you sign on to work somewhere that's hazardous to your health like that?" Vi reached out to take Mira's shoulders in her hands, but jumped back instantly at the contact. "Ow!" she hissed. "Are you okay?" Mira asked, suddenly worried. She didn't have time to notice the warmth that grew on her bracelet right away. "Yeah, I just shocked myself or something," Vivian said, shaking her wrists. "Don't worry about it." After a moment, she continued, "You should be more worried about yourself, really." "Thanks for your concern, but I have it under control now," Mira stated. "Now?" Vivian asked. After a moment of silence, the other model leaned against the edge of her uncle's desk. Her jaw clenched as she looked Mira up and down. "How did you—" "You don't need to worry," Mira said, brushing her comment off. "Besides, the attacker only targets wizards, right? You're safe, just like you said." "Right," Vi replied slowly. "Well, this was fun, but you should really take my word for it, and you should be on guard. And I'd rethink signing that contract. Seriously." Vivian stood and walked to the door, flicking the lights off as she left the room and silently stormed down the hallway. She left the door open. Mira watched her go. The whole encounter was too confusing to take in completely. Vivian's arguments and reactions were all over. It was hard to see the girl's full motivations. Though Mira could hazard a few guesses, she had a hunch that Vivian was keeping secrets, more than the usual model did. Luckily, she was in the best place to flush them out. She hurried to the back of the desk and started pulling out the drawers, searching. Mira didn't get very far when a large figure filled the doorway. She looked up, fearing she'd been caught, cursing her own impatience. "What are you doing?" Loxus asked. She breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm looking for the modeling profiles. Shut the door and help me dig," she explained. Loxus joined her behind the desk after an initial moment of confusion. "What do they look like?" he asked. He moved the file cabinets against the wall. "They should be pages with our headshots on the top and basic information about us below in case of emergency, or if they need a reference, or—" "Found them!" Mira smiled. She pulled out a giant stack of papers and laid them on the desk. "We need to find Vivian's." Loxus stood behind her as they each flipped through half the stack. "Why?" Loxus asked. "I think she might be behind these attacks," Mira admitted. "It's not much to go off of, but if she's not the one directly behind it, then she's either directing someone or being used by someone." "What made you think it was her?" Loxus asked. He came across Mira's profile and was momentarily distracted by her smiling portrait. It was an older picture, obviously taken before they'd all been frozen in time in Tenru Island, and before her sister had returned from what they had all thought was death. Mira did not look much younger, but he could see the uncertainty in her face. Her hair and makeup was flawless as usual, but he saw the girl underneath who was afraid and looking for an outlet. He didn't need to glance sideways to know how different she was today. If this whole modeling mission was anything to go by, Mira was no longer laden by her fears. "Did you find it?" Mira asked, noticing Loxus stop moving. Quickly spanning his remaining profiles, Loxus nodded. "Here." "Let's see." Mira took the pages, quickly scanning through the information. She pointed to the note at the bottom. "Look! Mage abilities, basic transformation, no formal training, no guild association." "So she's a wizard, then," Loxus stated. "Doesn't that make her a target?" "It would, if she wasn't the one behind the attacks. I know this might sound crazy, but I think her motive is just jealousy. All the girls who have been attacked are up-and-coming stars who could upstage her, and just now, She threatened me after we talked about signing an exclusive modeling contract. I think she wants that contract and doesn't plan on giving her uncle a choice." Loxus lifted an eyebrow in disbelief. "You think this girl is okay with almost killing people just to be a better model," he clarified. Mira nodded. "That's my guess. I just have to figure out how she's doing it now." Mira pored over the profile again. Voices echoed in the hallway. "Someone's coming," Loxus said. Mira scooped the papers together and shoved them back in the drawer that she found them in. Luckily, the lights in the room were off and the door was closed, but that would only buy them a few seconds. The voices grew louder. "Sounds like the director," Loxus muttered. "And Vivian," Mira added. "I'd rather not get caught in here by them." Their conversation grew closer, and it was apparent they were headed to the office. While she could probably talk her way out of being in his office with the lights off and the door closed, she wanted to avoid coming up with lies if she could help it. "We have to hide." A quick glance of the room left little hope for not being caught. The space under the door darkened. "Where?" Loxus couldn't help but laugh. Mira sighed when she realized he seemed okay with being caught. "Let me grab my glasses and," came the director's voice right outside the door. "Under the desk," she hissed in a last-ditch effort. The doorknob jiggled and she dove underneath, pulling Loxus with her just in time. The desk was large, but not as big as she wished. In her panic, she incorrectly guessed the size needed for both of them and paid for it now. Loxus barely fit, let alone with her. As long as no one walked behind the desk, they would be fine. Blood racing, Mira tried to focus on calming her breathing and not stare directly into Loxus's face, even if it was just inches from her own. She quickly realized that if they were caught like this, it would be 100 times worse than being caught in the open. She cursed her luck. The director entered the room, flipped on the light, and moved to the desk. Vivian followed him. "Why her?" she pouted. "Vivian, we've talked about this," he scowled. He fumbled on the desk for his glasses case. Mira let out a sigh of relief when she heard him find it. "I can't make the designers pick one model over the other. Outside of giving everyone one label piece as promised in their contracts, I don't pick the lineups." The desk shifted as the director leaned against the edge. Vivian settled onto the chair opposite, while Loxus shared an exasperated look with Mira. The two hoped they wouldn't be trapped for too long. Feeling her left arm start to go numb where she leaned into the desk's side, Mira tried to relax her legs without leaning into Loxus more than she needed to. The way they were crouched, nested together, was anything but comfortable. Loxus debated just giving himself away to spare both of them the embarrassment if they were found like this. "Look, I don't think you should offer it to her. Earlier, I found her with one of the designers doing a private shoot. I'm sure an exclusive contract wouldn't stop her from doing it again. It's not—" "Stop. I never told any of the designers or the models they couldn't do extra shoots with each other. We've already done the magazine layouts, so whatever they shot won't be included in this issue. If anything, after hearing about it, I'd want her to work for me more now that I know she's networking with these designers and has a good relationship with them. It's probably something you should be working on if you want to move up in the industry, Vivian." They heard him stand and move towards the door. Vivian was strangely silent as the lights clicked off. They both left the room and finally closed the door. Mira let out a sigh of relief. By some miracle they had not been caught. Loxus grunted as he hit his head on the underside of the desk, trying to get himself out. They struggled together, a tangle of legs and arms, until they were finally free. Mira couldn't help but giggle. Eventually, Loxus helped her up and they looked around the dark room. "We have a motive," Mira stated. "We just need to know how." The blonde man nodded. Upstairs, they relayed their information to the team. Freed returned just before them with nothing to share. Leaving out the details of their hiding place, Mira explained what they found and then heard. Evergreen nodded. "So, you think she's behind the illness then?" she asked. "We know curses can result in magic deficiency disease, but we haven't heard of wizards being able to cause it," Freed stated. His glance at Loxus was quick. "If she did do it, why isn't she part of a guild?" Bixlow asked. "With that kind of magic, she might even be S-class." "She wants to be a model," Mira explained, "not a wizard." The team shrugged. None of them could imagine why anyone would choose to be anything other than a full-blown magic user. Mira sighed. "It doesn't matter, though. She needs to be stopped. Luckily, I think I have a plan." "But we've run out of full shooting days," Evergreen said. The director wants me to sign that exclusive modeling contract with him. Until I've signed it, I'm still her target," Mira explained. The group nodded. "We need to verify that it's her doing the attacking, though, and not going through someone else." "How?" "Tomorrow, the schedule just says makeup," Mira said. "I'm set to go with the first group, and I assume Vivian is as well. When I don't show up, I need all of you to tell Vivian that I was feeling sick, but rescheduled for later in the day. I'm hoping she'll try to prevent me from shooting at all." Evergreen hummed. "It's rather simple, but it should work." "Someone should stay with you, though, just in case she isn't the only one in on the attacks," Freed stated. "Loxus and I can watch Evergreen." "I'll stay with Mira," Loxus interrupted matter-of-factly. "I think you should go down with them," Mira disagreed. "If Vivian thinks she'll have to face both of us, I don't think she'll bite. You can circle back up once you notice she's taken the bait." Loxus frowned but nodded anyway. They all knew this was truly Mira's mission, so if the plan was solid enough, they would go along with it. He knew Mira could handle a vengeful model as much as the rest of them. She was an S-class wizard after all. The next morning, Mira was up and ready even though she did not need to be. She hoped that their plan would work, and they could finally finish this mission. Bidding Evergreen and the boys good luck, she watched them head downstairs. All she could do now was wait. She relaxed on the couch, fiddling with the magic script bracelet. It took longer than she expected, but eventually there was a knock on her door. Mira called out for them to wait, threw a sweater over her shoulders, and moved to open it. She was greeted by Vivian. The young girl looked apologetic, but Mira noticed a bright, youthful glow about her. She wondered if the makeup artist had done something different that morning. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Vivian sighed. "I heard you weren't feeling well." "I'm doing better now," Mira explained. "I should be ready to head down soon." Vivian did not react like Mira expected. There was no worried surprise in her eyes, just a genuinely soft smile. I wanted to apologize for yesterday," Vivian continued as if she did not hear Mira's words. "Did you want to take a walk before you head to the studio? The sun might help you recover faster." "Sure," Mira hesitated. If she left the room, the boys wouldn't know where she went if she needed backup. Vivian was acting strange, and she was not sure if she liked it, but she also needed to solve this case. She would take the risk. "Did you see the setup for the party later?" Vivian asked as they walked down the stairs to the lobby. "No, I didn't know it was set up yet." "It's gorgeous," Vi smiled. The lobby was empty. Not even the receptionist was there to call a greeting. Mira shuddered. Vivian moved like silk beside her, smooth and silent. There was something in the air, or maybe a lack of something, and the S-class wizard struggled to figure out what it was. "I think I'll let the director know "There's no need," Vivian interrupted. "He's otherwise occupied. You won't be missed." Her words were too smooth, her smile too knowing. Mira missed the next sentence about seeing the beach and stepped towards the studio, reaching for the door instead. Vivian took her outstretched hand. "What's wrong, Mira?" she smiled. "Maybe you should sit down." Vivian's hand clamped down on Mira's bracelet, and both girls felt the charge run through them. Mira jumped back, wrenching her hand free of V's grip, while the younger model fell to her knees. Both girls watched the other, catching their breath. The studio door swung open, breaking their stare down. Loxus stumbled through, barely keeping upright. "Mira!" he called when he spotted the guildmate with the other model. "If she touches you!" He crumbled to the floor, hands on his temple. "Loxus!" Mira turned to Vivian. "Stop! What did you do?" "The same thing I'm going to do to you," Vivian laughed. She held out Mira's bracelet. "And without this, you're just as vulnerable as they were." "How?" Mira started to ask, but then she knew the answer. It slid off in Vivian's grip when she pulled away. "It was a good try," Vivian acknowledged. "I wonder why you didn't think of it sooner. If you had all this magic, you might have even stopped me." The bracelet snapped into pieces in her hand. "Mira, run!" Loxus growled, the static building through his clothing and hair. "Go get help!" "Quiet!" Vivian frowned, directing her attention back to the blonde man on the floor as he inched towards them. "I don't know how you can still move, but I'll happily take your extra energy." Before Vivian could reach out and steal the last of Loxus's magic energy, Mira lunged forward and grabbed her hands. "Don't!" she ordered. The S-class wizard's normally cheerful eyes had darkened. Vivian gritted her teeth and turned her attention back to Mira. The usual calm the model possessed still had Mira on guard, but not enough. She felt the familiar throb of a headache, but before she could react, the pain increased tenfold until she felt like her head was caught in a vice. Her knees buckled. Freed from Mira's grip, Vivian's hasty grasp on her forearm grew stronger, holding it high as Mira sunk down, kneeling in pain before her. "You should have transformed while you had the chance," Vi gloated. Throwing her head back in near ecstasy, the model took Mira's grasping hand in a mockery of comfort between her own, siphoning off her magical energy. "Now I can say I defeated 2 of FairyTail's best S-class wizards." The model burst out laughing. "Well, if I was going to tell anyone." "Why?" Mira shuddered, fighting the weakness that came with the headache and loss of her magical energy. Vivian's grip was strong, but if she could only hold out a little more. "Without you, I won't have anyone in my way," Vi smiled, her eyes clouded with the magic she absorbed. "With all the magic energy from you and all those dumb models inside, I'll be young and beautiful forever. No one will find them in time to save them. My uncle's magazine will be ruined, and I'll be the sole survivor. Everyone will want the most beautiful model who suffered so much to work for them. Think of all the publicity I'll get when I share my story of how I survived these crazed attacks that no one could stop." There, that was the reason. Mira dropped her face and grit her teeth. No one would die today. She barely heard Vivian drone on until a single phrase caught her concentration, spurring the transformation she'd been holding off on as her backup magic reserves kicked in. They'll wonder how such an unassuming model survived the onslaught when Fiore's strongest guild members fell. But I'll never tell. I'll just be the dumb model they expect us all to be. Beautiful, but stupid. Laughter rumbled from Mira's chest, breaking Vivian's tirade. "I'd normally stop that kind of talk from a fellow model, but you've proven yourself right." Vi shouted out in panic and dropped the clawed hand she found within her grasp. She shook her hands as if burned. "What? This energy is different. It's so heavy." She closed her eyes and put a hand to her face. "How?" Vi looked horrified as Mira rose to her feet in her Satan Soul takeover. "You shouldn't have any magical energy left to use your powers," Vivian reasoned. "No, no, no!" "You said yourself," Mira mocked. She rose into the air, just enough to float over the floor, towering over Vivian as the model backed herself into the wall. "I'm part of Fiore's strongest guild. Why would I be weak enough to let you win?" Vivian stared up at her in fear. Any random passerby looking into the lobby would see what appeared to be an evil demon threatening a beautiful angel. The truth was not far off, but not as it appeared. In the back of her mind, Mira wondered if Vivian even knew how to use the magic she had stolen to attack. The FairyTail wizard's ability allowed her to keep her wits and strategize without the bloodlust overpowering her. It was a good thing control came as second nature. Even with Vivian's crimes, Mira knew the girl would not fight back the way her usual targets would. This would be a slaughter. The thought was almost enough to break Mira's hold on her takeover. She had no intention of hurting the jealous model, but Vivian didn't need to know that. Electricity leapt between her claws, building from one of Mira's attacks that she had no plan to actually use. Vivian's flawless face, made even more perfect with the flush of stolen magical energy, whitened. She clutched her hands to her chest, and Mira raised an eyebrow at the blackened fingertips on her right hand. She let the sparks jump erratically across her scaled forearms in a not-so-veiled threat. "You will return what you stole, willingly," Mira stated, "or I will be forced to take it from you." Vivian's fearful eyes ran with tears as she watched the lightning arc down Mira's body. There was no doubt that the girl could imagine what a single spark might feel like. "Now!" Mira ordered. Her word elicited a quick nod from Vivian, and the demon took a step back to allow her room. Vivian stumbled to where Loxus lay, still conscious, but not for long. "If any of them die—" "I know!" Vivian cried as she touched Loxus's head. "They won't!" After a few tense seconds, the blond man opened his eyes. Seeing Vivian so close, he grabbed at her neck to stop her, but Mira caught him. "Stop!" The word was said without emotion, and both Loxus and Vi unconsciously shivered. The young model withdrew her hands and choked back a sob. Mira's demonic aura had more of an effect on her than the mage had realized. If only all of her enemies were this frightened by her weakest takeover form. "The others are still in the studio," Loxus said after a moment. He sat up slowly, leaning against the desk for support. "Let's go," Mira stated. She floated behind V as the girl stumbled down the long corridor into the studio. It wasn't necessary that she fly, but she wanted V to see the difference in their power as clearly as possible. The area looked untouched, except for the fallen people scattered about. V moved to her uncle first, but Mira stopped her. "Revive my guildmates," she ordered. Her takeover did not allow her to feel the guilt of the selfish-sounding order. The S-class wizard knew that she could not hold her transformation as long as she'd need to. She needed the backup, even as weakened as they'd be. She watched as Vivian revived first Freed, then Evergreen, and finally Bixlow, before trying to go back to her uncle. "Now the models," Mira directed. "But what if I run out of magic?" V asked, sending a fearful glance his way. "He goes last." "But—" "Then don't run out," Mira stated, deadly serious. She watched the model gulp and wipe a fresh batch of tears from her eyes before she moved to start on the other girls. "Mira," Freed mumbled, "is Loxus—" Wings and tail vanished as Mira released her magic. She hoped she didn't look as fragile as she felt. "He's in the lobby. He's recovering." "Well, what happened?" Bixlow stuttered. "Mira, did you—" It's all right," Mira smiled. "Vivian's behind the attacks. She's fixing what she did. Everyone's gonna be all right." Her vision blurred for a moment, and Mira was forced to steady herself with a hand on Freed's shoulder. "We need to get the town's patrolman here to arrest her. She's just a civilian, even if she did this all with magic." Mira hesitated, feeling faint again. "Before she finishes—" "Mira," Freed said, steadying her shoulders as her head tipped. The adrenaline from the demon form had supported her before, but now her energy faded. The girls came to, voices echoing around the room. Mira could only smile and let her eyes close for what felt like just a moment. Blackness swallowed her. When she woke, the fresh air and sunshine from the open window threw her from a loop. She sat up, fighting the instant nausea that lingered from the long-gone headache. She spotted her guildmate in a chair in the corner dozing. His large frame dwarfed the tiny seat. "Mira, you're up, thank goodness," Freed's voice echoed from the door frame on the other side of the room. "Welcome back," Bixlow joked. "How long was I sleeping?" Mira asked, readjusting her pillow to lean against the headboard of the hospital bed. Evergreen perched at the foot of the bed while the two boys crowded around the side. 3 days, Evergreen explained. She shot a conspiring look with Mira and continued. "If only someone had taken my advice about waking a sleeping princess, you might have been awake for the wrap party last night." Mira blushed and followed her guildmate's eyes to the blonde in the chair. As if he knew they teased him, he opened both eyes. "The dragon wakes to the maiden's voice," Evergreen laughed. She explained. "He's been asleep almost as much as you were. He told us he'd keep watch, but every time we come in he'd be snoring in the corner. I can't believe he didn't wake you sooner." Loxus shot Evergreen a look. "Was everyone—" Mira started to ask. Did Vivian—" "We got the patrol to the studio just as she revived the director. Though she wasn't going anywhere after that," Freed said. "You'd never think it was her, either," Bixlow asked. "She had dark circles under her eyes and was pale as a ghost." "She didn't know how to control the energy she gave back," Mira mused. "She probably ran out and had to give him some of her own." "Well, she was arrested and the Magical Council has been informed. Everyone else was taken here to recover. They were released just in time to hold a belated party last night," Freed explained. "Good. I'm glad they're all okay. The director spoke to me at the party. He wanted to offer you another modeling gig. Triple the salary, too," Freed added. "I told him I wasn't—" "So did we," Evergreen smiled. "Don't worry, we took care of it, because if you left us to be a full-time model now, it might give Lucy the wrong idea. You know we'd never hear the end of that." Mira could only laugh with them as they teased their other guildmates. As exhausted as she was overjoyed that the other models were safe, and they'd completed the mission without casualty. Modeling was fun, but she looked forward to returning to the rowdy guild hall once more.